Good morning. We're ready to go. Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome those members of the public and press who are joining us today for this meeting of the Combined Authority Board. There are no fire drills scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting, and if we can follow the Democratic Services officers who can lead us to the assembly point. A reminder to those present that the public session of this meeting will be live streamed and a recording will be placed on the Combined Authority's website. Can I ask everyone present to turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place? As always, I welcome and value the views of all board members during our debates. I do, though, reserve the right to exercise my discretion as chair during the course of the meeting to determine the time permitted for speeches and the number of speeches to be made by any member or officer in order to manage the meeting efficiently. And before I go on to the next point, I should probably introduce myself as well to anybody watching. Mayor Dr. Nick Johnson, Chair of the Combined Authority Board for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Welcome again to all of you here and those online. Starting as we do with all meetings, apologies for absence, but would the head of Democratic Services let us know of any apologies?
Thank you, Mayor. We have apologies today from Councillor Sarah Comboy and we have Councillor Sam Wakeford here as substitute. We've also just received apologies from Daryl Preston.
Well, thank you, and hello to Sam. Nice to see you again. Secondly, we move on to the minutes. Is the board happy to approve minutes from the 22nd of January 2025 as an accurate record and to note the action log? Councillor Bowden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor, and good morning to you.
Good morning.
Agenda item 11, it states that I said I propose to reduce the levy for the Highways Authority, which would be a more sensible use of the money, diverting it to areas with greater demand. What I actually said was diverting it so that more potholes could be repaired, and I'd be grateful if it were amended accordingly.
Well, obviously, we'll check on the record and yeah. Thank you. Noted. Yep. Okay. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, which is declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest in any items being considered today? As always, declarations of interest can be made at any point during the meeting. And then moving on to, well, we can skip over announcements. We've got big things to get on with, and we move straight to public questions. We have received 2 public questions for this meeting. Both questions have been published on the website. The first question is from Simon Martin, a local resident, and he has asked that his question be read out by the Democratic Services Officer. The second question is from Sarah Hughes on behalf of the Cambridgeshire Sustainable Travel Alliance, and we have Sarah joining us in person today. I will take the questions in the order they were submitted and then give my response. So first, the question from Mr. Martin to be read out by our Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, Mayor. So this question from Simon Martin. Section 5.4, current situation in CPCA in the agenda pack, sets out the current involvement the Combined Authority has in bus services across the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough region in areas where the Combined Authority already has some form of day-to-day control and say in what happens with the existing bus network. The region has for recent decades been blighted with unwelcoming, poor condition bus stops, has what appears to be an increasingly unreliable real-time passenger information system which doesn't always reflect the true running status of buses, lacks an easily available, affordable single ticket to be used across all operators and routes, has bus journeys badly impacted by traffic and roadworks, and doesn't appear to be doing anywhere near enough to actively increase awareness of the bus routes across the network that actually does exist right now in the region, not even to the catchment areas of those routes receiving £15 million so as to improve ridership levels on those services, both now and in the years ahead, to contribute to their chance of sustainable long-term success as the region transforms into the chosen method of bus reform. The report further outlines at paragraph 5.2 that bus passenger numbers locally and nationally have been declining for many years, even long before COVID. With £15.046 million being invested in the vitally important, socially necessary bus services in this financial year alone, we as a region risk continuing this downward trend with further reductions in passenger numbers in the interim before the Combined Authority is able to have a more say and control and such a continued fall in numbers could surely make services more unsustainable and costly to fund them than they already are. As a bus passenger, I very much welcome and look forward to improvement of the bus network in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. I'm hugely supportive of the overall aim that the Combined Authority has shown it wishes to achieve. Please can the Combined Authority outline exactly what it is willing and able to do in line with the region's adopted bus service improvement plan, bus strategy and vision for better buses, so as to further improve the day-to-day real-life experience of bus passengers in the region from today, covering the immediate short term, so as residents and visitors experience real noticeable improvements and avoid further bus network decline, right through the interim period until the time that the chosen model of bus reform has been completely implemented across the entire region, fully operating as the model of bus reform that is chosen today.
Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Martin for a very detailed and well-informed question. I would hope for those who are eagle-eyed in the room and for those who are online, you would see that by parking a bus literally on the desk in front of me today, I take bus services very seriously. It is my priority to also ensure that further progress is made to improve bus services and deliver our bus strategy, whilst the bus service improvement plan, whether with franchising or enhanced partnership, is delivered. The investments in bus services over recent years are testament to a priority the Combined Authority, indeed the Mayor, has made to provide better bus services and step in when the commercial market no longer provides some of those services. This is vital for connectivity in our region. The Tiger On Demand services that have recently gone live in much of the region show the real-world differences and improvements that can be made as we reform the bus network, especially for rural areas. The Combined Authority has also delivered a significant percentage of the wider precept-funded services, making real differences for residents with improvements to frequencies, new places being served, and better connectivity between services. There are further Tiger routes to follow in spring 2025. Since 2019, Cambridge and Peterborough have had a 69% increase in local authority supported bus service miles, while there was a 10% increase across England, outside England, over this time. The Tiger Pass has supported and enabled those under 25 in huge numbers across the region to access education, work and leisure opportunities, and has seen significant applications and usage. Working closely with our bus operators is vital to ensure the ongoing success of that scheme and the local fare cap and other fare and ticketing schemes that deliver for passengers. Having an effective, detailed idea of passenger satisfaction is important. And as we press for improvements now, roll out bus reforms and monitor our performance, further details on that will be brought by officers to the March Transport and Infrastructure Committee. We have the Bus Operators Forum meeting involving our bus operators, highway authorities and the Combined Authority, and it is very important to us. And we aim to use this as a base for ensuring improvements during the transition to whatever form of bus reform is taken. In the forum and elsewhere, we are working closely with the local highway authorities on roadworks and congestion, and will continue to do this up to and as part of bus reform. There are over 20 million journeys made on the bus network in the region each year. It's the primary mode of transport for so many of our residents, and it's vital we make the system better. We've already started a process, but we remain ambitious to go further and better. Thank you. Question 2. Oh, sorry, is Sarah, sorry, she's in the room. Sarah, hi, thanks for coming.
That's all.
We're on, we're live.
Thank
World
you.
is watching.
Good morning, everyone. I'm asking my question on behalf of Cambridgeshire Sustainable Travel Alliance. We're an alliance of 31 organisations active in the areas of transport, environment and health. Cambridgeshire Sustainable Travel Alliance notes that on the 24th of January, the Combined Authority's Transport and Infrastructure Committee voted unanimously to recommend that the Mayor chooses franchising as the key to bus reform. We were delighted to note that Labour, Liberal Democrat and Conservative members on the Transport and Infrastructure Committee joined the 63% of consultation respondents who supported franchising. Our alliance believes that franchising would give the authority the powers it needs to establish the expanded, coordinated, attractive and high-quality bus network which our communities require, by bringing the bus network under local control, accountable to the Mayor, who in turn is accountable at the ballot box. An enhanced partnership, however, would be contingent on agreement by the current private operators, with an effective veto available to the one dominant operator, potentially jeopardising effective reform and perpetuating barriers to entry by other operators who might bid to provide our communities with innovative, high-quality services. While franchising may bring risks and responsibilities, we ask the board to consider the risks inherent in not proceeding. Post-deregulation, our bus network has shrunk drastically, leaving many rural communities with no public transport options. Recent research from the Institute of Transport Studies showed that between 2008 and 2023, bus services declined by 84% in Fenland, 75% in Peterborough, and 71% in Huntingdonshire and East Cambs. This decline must be reversed. A high-quality, affordable, accessible bus network is the cornerstone of an effective public transport system, of fulfilling the authority's key ambitions of economic growth, connectivity and quality of life, of our young people's access to college courses, training and jobs, of access to shops, healthcare and a social life, of stemming the seemingly inexorable rise in road congestion, and of the prosperity and well-being of our local communities. So we come to our question, what will the Mayor do to provide Cambridgeshire and Peterborough with a bus network that is fit for the future?
It goes without saying for you, it's clear you're very passionate about public transport, and thank you for your question. I hope you also appreciate we will shortly be having a very extensive and detailed discussion on the bus reform item coming next. And with that in mind, I'm somewhat limited in my response where I can go. But like I said in the previous question, the bus network, as you have articulated clearly, is vital to all our residents. The Combined Authority have made it a priority in recent years to provide bus services when withdrawn by commercial operators, boosting frequencies on existing services and putting in place new services to benefit residents. It is vital we make the bus and wider transport network better. Bus services are the backbone of public transport, as you articulated. And regardless of the delivery and governance model to be discussed shortly, the Combined Authority will continue its work to deliver the bus service improvement plan and bus strategy to build a better bus network for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough residents. We will talk of this again on today's agenda. Thank you. Do you have a follow-up? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Bowden.
Mayor, thank you for drawing our attention a few minutes ago to the fact that you've put a little bus in front of you. It's very, very appropriate. But what's particularly good is that you've chosen to have a traditional route master, which is the most successful city bus that this country has ever seen. And I hope that that's an indication that you'll be able to tell us that you'd be willing to use traditional route masters on some city routes within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough in the future.
Well, it was something that was passed on to me, who somebody appreciated that I'm a mayor. I've always been dedicated in all sorts of buses. I could have brought Go Northern buses. I could have brought McGill's from the west coast of Scotland. But I chose the red because it is an iconic sign of what buses have delivered for our capital. And obviously something that we should be thinking about, where people in that part of the world benefit from their bus services. So thank you for the attention. I've parked the bus today here, and we'll be focusing on it going forward. We received no petitions for this meeting, and so item 7 is the forward plan. Are there any questions or comments, or can we take it as approved? We have to vote on this one. So those in favour of the forward plan as submitted, those in favour? That's unanimous, I think. Yeah, unanimous. Okay. Item 8. as if you didn't know, is bus reform. So before we discuss our substantive item, I would like to refer to our monitoring officer who will outline how the decisions on this item will take place.
Thank you, Chair. Just an opportunity just to mention procedure for this morning, because the decision is slightly different to ones which are normally taken within the board, given that ultimately this will be a mayoral decision. So the matter is before the board today for the constituent councils to make a recommendation for a mayoral decision. What we're expecting this morning is the chair will seek a member of the board to move and second recommendations. I would anticipate that would be all of the recommendations from A through to G. Following which there can be obviously the appropriate questions and debate, presentation of the reports and reference to where it's been through tick and scrutiny and so on. When that's concluded, given that from A to G will have been moved and seconded, and then anticipating there'll be a vote, given the issues and given the recommendations there, I think my suggestion would be that every item is taken in turn rather than a block vote, as members may have their own views in different parts of it. To be clear, just in terms of E to G, in terms of the recommendations, because this is not set out explicitly in the report, they will follow the same voting requirements as in recommendation D, for obviously matters which relate to transport. As the legal implications in the report confirm, section 123G4 of the Transport Act 2000 is amended, confirm that the functions of deciding whether to make a franchising scheme or not is a function of the combined authority exercisable only by the mayor acting on behalf of the combined authority. The board is asked to make a recommendation to the mayor, but does not have power to mandate the mayor to act in a particular manner. Hopefully that goes through just the process in terms of how the decision will be looked at by the board. And so, Mayor, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, obviously very important we get the final procedures right on this, and thank you to Matt. Councillor Anna Smith, as the lead member for Transport and Infrastructure, as my deputy and as somebody who has worked alongside me on many of this work, are you happy to move all of the recommendations in this report?
I am.
I guess now I need to know, is there a seconder in the room for this? Thank you, Councillor Dennis Jones. That's okay. Sorry.
Mayor, could I also request a recorded vote on these items, please, when we come to that moment?
On all the recommendations.
On all the recommendations.
You'll need two of the members from different constituent authorities to agree to that. We've got one.
Okay, one from Councillor Nestling. I need another one from, I'll take it from Sam. Okay, so just to spread the love. Councillor Wakeford, thank you for that. So yes, all recorded votes. Right.
That will also mean, Chair, I think that all the votes will be conducted on behalf for the board by the Democratic Services Manager.
Okay, thank you. I think you are important again to get it all right. Wow, Judith, I will now hand over to you as the exceptionally hard-working Executive Director of Place and Connectivity to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Board, for the opportunity of making an introduction to this paper. I'm getting a little bit of an echo, but hopefully that's okay outside of this room. As you're aware, bus reform has been a long-standing consideration by this board, and that is in recognition that bus services have not been delivering for the residents and businesses of the region, and officers were asked by this board to look at alternatives. So to the status quo, there are in effect two options which have been considered by this board. One, the enhanced partnership, which means negotiating with operators to provide a more coherent pattern of services, but within the existing system of private operators. But that system is obviously only as good as the negotiations with the bus operators, and we would have, as the public authority, less ability to frame and develop the network. The other option is franchising, and that is the situation when the public sector takes over the network and contracts private sector operators onto services with long-term contracts and performance management in place, giving the public sector the ability to frame and develop the network. So by June last summer, the 24th of July, this board approved the business case or the assessment with those 5 cases within it, and received and approved the audit report by Grant Thornton, which confirmed both the analysis and the data in that report. And that assessment, that business case, concluded that a franchise model was favoured as best delivering the strategic objectives of the organisation, and stating that it was affordable and offered value for money. So the agreement in July was that officers should go out to consultation with both the public and the statutory consultees. So we held that consultation from August to November over more than a 14-week period. And as you can see from the extensive reports, there were many methods of engagement to maximise that response, and over 1,600 responses were received. And since then, since the end of November, until these papers were published, it's been our job as officers to go through all of those responses, consider all of them, and then report the response to this committee. And that was then to this board, and that was then obviously previously reported to the Transport and Infrastructure Committee on the 24th of January, to the OSC Working Group on the 24th of January, and indeed there was a full discussion at the full Overview and Scrutiny Committee on Monday the 27th. So there are a lot of papers, and my apologies for that, but clearly it's incredibly important that members of this board have all the information available to them. So I'm just going to quickly summarise what's in the pack, because I think that's useful to just guide us through the materials. So you obviously have the cover report, which we've written to sum up both the processes that we went through and the results. And those were obviously reported as well to Transport and Infrastructure Committee and Overview and Scrutiny Committee. But this board report does also contain the minutes and information that were considered at those committees for your consideration. And we can obviously go through that in this meeting. The second pack of documents is what is the Westco report, and that is a report of the process of the consultation and the responses. So it sets out how the consultation was done with both public and statutory consultees, and how that was considered. And you've got 8 appendices there, which really set out the detail, including the responses of statutory consultees, and indeed, if anyone's dived into it, the code frames that we use to analyse some of that data. Then we have our consideration of that report. So the Combined Authority Response Report. We went through all of those responses and then grouped them into themes and have set them out under the 5 cases of the business case. So where issues were raised around the strategic case, those are grouped under the strategic case for your consideration. So they're set out: strategic, economic, commercial, financial and management. And that is our officer response to the responses to the consultation. You then have a very important document, which is the small and medium-sized enterprise operators paper, which is where particularly that element of the proposals and responses was considered, and where we respond to the points made by those small and medium-sized operators. And that's an important element which came out very strongly during the consultation. And then there are a number of required documents that you will see in the pack that are required by the legal process. So in summary, the report concluded, and I think this is best set out in item 5.12 in the cover paper, that our response assessment and considerations conclude that the original assessment made in July remains in place, and that the report recommends to the Mayor that CPCA proceed with the proposed franchise scheme as the preferred option for delivering the strategic objectives in the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area. Each case was considered with those representations, and it remains the case that those strategic objectives, delivering value for money within the funding element, continue to recommend franchising as the way forward. We obviously received many submissions and individual responses, and you can see those in the report. And I think it's really important that at this meeting we consider the issues that came out of that, and in particular the most significant issues that we cover in that report are around the challenges on affordability and deliverability. And we set out in that response report how we are able to respond to those challenges and also make some suggestions. Clearly, in terms of the affordability, we have set out how the budget and the business case and the business plan works over a 30-year period and how that could be met. We also set out that we will continue to explore approaches to enable the financial case and the finances and the budgets to become stronger by exploring grants and sources of money that could not be factored into the assessment originally because we did not have control over those resources at the time of writing the assessment. We've also set up how we will grow the team and commit to bringing in consultants and expertise to ensure that we have the best people in place to advance the franchise. The report sets out 6 areas where we have made particular suggestions in response to the consultation responses. So just to quickly summarise those, they are to propose longer mobilisation periods so that enables more operators to participate and prepare to deliver this opportunity. The second one is to ensure that the consultation and engagement of stakeholders that we have done over this autumn is built upon and is part of the implementation and ongoing operation. The third one is to ensure that working with community transport remains a key part of how we move forward in any future model. The fourth one is that we will work with the CPCA Growth Hub to support SMEs in this area to have the skills in order to be able to participate in the procurements opportunities to maximise the resilience within the system and the opportunities. The fifth is to look at safety as a key issue, both at bus stops, on buses, and health and safety within depots, for instance, to make sure that that's a key plank of our thinking going forward. And finally, and clearly very importantly, is the ongoing confirmation that we are committed to transparency and accountability in terms of how this implementation moves forward and is reported through and to and overseen by this board and the committee structures that sit underneath this board. Clearly, this is a hugely complex issue, and any 5-minute introduction is not going to do justice to the many pages of documentation that we have shared with you. And therefore, it's particularly important that I'm accompanied today by colleagues who have worked incredibly hard technically to bring forward these reports. So I've got Andrew Highfield as the Assistant Director of Public Transport, who is obviously has led the work of the detailed technical work and is able to answer any of the questions that you may have. I'm also accompanied by Janice Gotts, who is, as you all know, the Section 73 officer and has worked with us very closely in terms of the affordability and the financial case with her colleague Rob Emery. Ed Coleman, Head of Communications, has obviously led the consultation process, and Richard Jeremy is also with us, who has been the implementation manager during this process. We've also had considerable support from the legal team, including Matt and Rena, and indeed we have Martin Fleetwood online, who is from Addleshaw Goddard, who are providing us with legal advice as well. We obviously have had the use of ITP and other colleagues who developed the original assessment. So before I finish, I just wanted to highlight the 4 recommendations. Matt has already talked us through all of those, but obviously we are very committed to working through any of the questions that you have to enable you to make informed positions on the voting in front of us, and then to inform the position of the board to the Mayor. So thank you, Mayor, and I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Judith. And thank you for the officers who are joining you at the table, but also a full acknowledgement to the many, many other members of the team who have worked together alongside you to get to the point we are today. Just before I go on, I'm conscious that obviously this has been discussed at other committees beforehand. On this one, we had hoped to get Councillor van der Weer from Overview and Scrutiny to give the particular feedback. I know we emailed him, tried. Okay, well, we'll just have to take it as, what is in the report, but we do have the benefit of the chair of TIC, Transport and Infrastructure Committee, Councillor Smith, and obviously you did move the motion. Could I invite you to bring, just report back from a point of view of the lead member for transport and what the TIC committee reported when they discussed this item?
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm going to limit myself here to reporting back on what was discussed at the Transport and Infrastructure Committee. I'm also joined by the Vice Chair of the Transport and Infrastructure Committee today, Councillor Wakeford. So if I miss anything, please feel free to alert me. The Transport and Infrastructure Committee voted unanimously across party to recommend franchising to the Mayor. And I should say that I am very proud to chair a committee which exercises significant scrutiny on all items, and the discussion was wide-ranging. So I'm going to summarise some of the key points that were made. You also have a summary in your packs that goes through that list, so please feel free to look at that as well. But we noted the 63% in favour of the franchising model and 12% against. We asked for confirmation on a variety of issues to put our minds at rest as a committee on some of the queries that members had. So this ranged from, for example, confirmation that there were a wide range of funding streams available to support franchising, and a discussion about the risks and benefits of franchising as opposed to an enhanced partnership. One of those parts of the discussion included noting that enhanced partnership involves, as Judith has said, negotiation with existing operators, and that would particularly require the agreement of larger operators. So it lacked that guaranteed benefit without that mutual agreement taking place, whereas franchising, by contrast, provided the public sector with greater control over planning and delivery. And the committee was very clear that this was not about individual companies or any comments on that. It was about the system and the structures that they were looking at here. I did make some notes of some of the comments that were made specifically, which I would just like to close off with here. One member said that they really welcomed the report, that they felt it made a change after years of deregulation. Many members raised the issue of connectivity across the region. Rural connectivity was particularly highlighted in that debate, and we asked about plans for strengthening and growing the network, and were given assurances by officers about the work that was taking place on that. There was a lot of focus on the opportunity of this as a step change and the ability to focus primarily on needs and not to have to be driven by profit in the same way. The committee were very keen to thank officers for their hard work, reflecting an enormous amount of work that has taken us to this point. One committee member referred to this being potentially a historic moment and was particularly keen to thank the Mayor for setting off this process of discussion of bus reform. So, and the Mayor was in attendance and was able to listen to that debate, did not participate in it, was there very much to hear what the committee had to say, and we were very grateful for the opportunity to do that with the Mayor listening in. So I think that's probably sufficient, but I'm obviously happy later in the debate to take any questions on that.
Thank you. Councillor Smith. Okay, it's a big report, probably the biggest I remember single report, not the, in terms of ever coming in the time I've been the mayor, but it's now open to the debate from the board. I'm sure somebody will want to speak. I can always suggest doing it in alphabetical order if that's preferable, but I'm going to be a bit surprised if nobody says anything.
Questions to officers as well.
And of course, questions to officers. Oh, well, that would be alphabetical order, but that's Councillor Bailey.
Yes, I do have a question. Thank you. Could officers please explain what the mechanism and implications would be if a future mayor came in and wanted to reverse this decision, if the mayor decides to go ahead with it? I'm interested in it within that, in the financial implications, not a figure, I'm not expecting that, but more of an idea of the work and resources that would be required and the mechanism that would need to be taken.
Well, I think the best way to do this is obviously it's a question that has come up obviously before. Maybe if I ask the monitoring officer to explain what the full process would be, and then obviously if you have any answers to those specific questions, then it would obviously gives a bit more flesh to the answer, I would guess. So over to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. If I can. The report at 7.3, page 29, once a decision to make franchising scheme has been made, variations to the scheme and ultimately the scheme's ratification are permitted, providing the requirements set out in the Act are followed. So effectively what you'd have to do is it wouldn't simply be a case of saying, okay, we're going to stop now. You're then looking at going through a process which may require further public consultation and meeting certain conditions under the Act. I don't have those in front of me at the moment, but basically you have to follow another process, and it's another process of consultation, and it's another process of trying to meet certain qualifications under the Act. I'm looking at if Marty wants to add anything, I know I can see him there. He's obviously welcome to do so, but I think there's a short answer. It's not easily undone. There is a process to be gone through, and that could take some time. Thanks.
Martin, good morning. You've kindly joined us, and if we've used your services along the way, it seems folly not to impart from your knowledge at the moment. If you would come in there, please.
Yes, thank you, Nick. Very, very happy to come in on that. The provisions for if you need to revoke the scheme are set out in section 123N of the Transport Act 2000. And you actually have to go through a review process of how the franchising is operating. There are only 3 conditions where you can actually revoke the scheme. That's where local services are likely to do better if the scheme didn't apply, that the continuing operation of the scheme is likely to cause financial difficulties for the authority, or the burdens of continuing the scheme are likely to outweigh the benefits of doing so. To understand whether that happens or not, there has to be an assessment. Much in the same way as at the very start of the franchising process, there was an assessment. If you are looking to revoke, you have to undertake an assessment to ensure that the conditions for revocation are being met. Otherwise, you would just continue operating. It then has to go through an audit. It has to also go through a public consultation. So it's very, very similar to the process for setting up bus franchising. It will, of course, take an amount of time to do, and the costs will be, the presumption is not completely unlike the costs of going through the initial process that we've already been through with CPCA. If at the end of the process, then there is a decision to be taken by the mayor as to whether there is going to be an end to franchising and revocations of that. They would then have a runoff of the existing contracts. It's not as if when the decision is made, everything stops, because you need to allow for the process of replacements being put in place. And it would likely then need new operators coming in and an enhanced partnership being put in place, or whatever the current scheme is. At the moment, we've got the two main schemes of franchising, enhanced partnerships. If it was to be looked at revocation in, say, 8 years' time, there may be other schemes that the current government might have put in place. We don't know. Hopefully that provides enough information for you.
Thank you, Martin. Okay, you've got the nod from Councillor Bailey, but Councillor Bowden, is this on the same point? Or
It's to,
yeah, fine.
It's to expand, in fact, on that point, and I very much welcome the clarification which has just been given. Mayor, you'll be aware, and it's within the report, that Fenland District Council recommended, on balance, enhanced partnerships rather than franchising, but it's also stated in the report, and it's entirely correct, that either scheme can be made to work. No doubt at all about that. My question is slightly different from that of Councillor Bailey, and that is, I personally, for reasons which may well come out later in this debate, I'm very far from happy with the way in which franchising is presented here. There's more than one method of franchising, and in fact, it's even accepted in the report. There are a number of different franchising models which exist anyway around the country, and the particular model that we've got, I feel very uncomfortable with. My question, which is a general one at this point, and again, mainly for officers to answer, is it not the case that whilst today you will be making a decision about whether to go with enhanced partnership or franchising, the way in which that is implemented is very much a matter which will come back before this board over the course of the next year and more. So the method of implementation is not necessarily determined by the vote we have today, merely whether we will go down the franchising or the enhanced partnership route.
Is that one for you, Matt? Or can I just, on one point you said, it's just a quick, because you mentioned in the report that Fenland District Council had recommended enhanced partnership.
Yes, it's in the report.
Okay, I'm just confused because obviously the Transport and Infrastructure Committee, the transport member for Fenland voted for the report.
Within our political party, we don't mandate individuals to vote in any particular way, and people use their best judgment.
That was, I can't remember which councillor it was. It was Councillor Seaton's. So it was,
yes, and I have no problem with the way in which Councillor Seaton spoke or voted. I'm merely responding about what is in this report in front of us and what my personal position is.
I wanted to clarify because I wanted to be respectful of Councillor Seaton's vote at that committee, but obviously acknowledge that you're the leader of Fenland District Council. Going back to the point, is that one for Judith or Judith? Judith, you want to come in?
Sorry. So obviously, if and when a decision is made, then obviously officers will need to commence implementation planning of whether it be an enhanced partnership or a franchise. And as we set out in table 4.4, we've already given some thought to those key areas, those key work streams that will need to be considered. So we have an assessment, and we will be clearly, because of the consultation and the process we've been through, we need to work within that assessment to take that model forward. But obviously, within those work streams, there will be decisions to be made, which, as I indicated in my earlier remarks, will need to be brought through the proper governance of this organisation for oversight.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Matt. I'm really happy to hear that the detail of all of this will be subject to further decisions to be made by the board. I think the detail is it's almost more important than the decision about enhanced partnerships or franchising. Either one can be done successfully, either one can be done unsuccessfully. And the devil is in the detail in all of this. And I'm grateful to hear that it will be in the future that detail will be established.
Councillor Bridget Smith, you indicated you want to speak.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to pick up on Councillor Bowden's point, because actually he makes a really important point here. So, when we first started talking about this, when we thought there was going to be significantly more income as a result of Cambridge City and the STZ. You know, my recollection is we were talking about a far more heavyweight franchising, and actually because that income isn't forthcoming, we've had to scale back to a far more, you know, lightweight franchising. So obviously, you know, things might change. And even though, you know, you've presented the predictions for where the money's coming from in the future, you know, things might change. And obviously there might be more of a commitment to public transport from this government or a future government and so on. So I do think that, you know, there's an argument for kind of working up various options so that, you know, when it comes to the crunch point of the final decision, I mean, is anything likely to change? I suppose is what I'm saying. You know, we have we can optimize what we can financially afford both now and in the future, because, you know, this isn't the all singing, all dancing version that we would all ideally like, because there's simply not enough money for it. So I think it's important that we understand, you know, what the possibilities are of more money coming in before the final decision's made, but also how the scheme can be scaled up if suddenly, you know, there is a windfall to us, you know, during the next mayoral term.
Sorry, in the point, which final decision are you talking about?
Well, the point at which we actually press go, because I mean, you know, what Councillor Bowden has just clarified with you is the decision today is enhanced partnership or franchising. But my understanding is the answer to his question was it's not this model of franchising. What his question was, are there still decisions to be taken on the actual model of franchising, which has slightly taken me by surprise. But I think that's what the answer to his question was.
I think we need further clarification from Judith.
Absolutely. So for absolute clarity, the assessment set out a model. What it did is it set out a median investment scenario for a franchise model and an enhanced partnership model. And the proposal that is in front of the board today is to decide whether to make a recommendation to the mayor to make a decision on the adoption of the franchise model. What we do have, so we have to base our work within that franchise model. What we do have, and what I was referring to in 4.4, is there will be decisions within that model that we can make. For instance, obviously there's a lot of work to be done on the commercial and procurement side. We can decide the phasing of lots. We can decide on which lots to go first with. We can decide to do smaller lots, larger lots. We will have decisions, for instance, to make about a depot strategy. We will have decisions to make within that. So what I just wanted to clarify for the board is that there is a model that's set out within the assessment, but underneath that assessment, there are still implementation decisions that will need to be made. So I hope that's helpful, Mayor.
Councillor Netzinger.
Thank you. So the first thing I want to do is to thank Judith and her team for an absolutely astonishing amount of work that's gone into this over quite a long period. I also want to say that the process of getting to this point today has been a very long one. Judith hasn't been here for all of it, and neither has Andrew. Some of us have been here for all of it, but quite a lot of us haven't. And during that period, an enormous amount has changed in the way in which, in the kind of landscape in which this decision is coming forward. I think the original discussions, I mean, the very, very early discussions about whether or not we go down a franchising route were actually started under the previous mayor even. So an enormous amount of change has taken place over that period. And it's quite likely that over the next 4 years, another enormous amount of change will take place. What we have to do, or what actually you have to do today, is is kind of take this particular snapshot in time and go down either a franchising or an enhanced partnership route. But even after we've made that decision, it will need to, the way in which that gets implemented, as Councillor Bowden has pointed out, will need to continue to be flexible depending on what happens in the landscape around it. And kind of probably the biggest thing that happened in the bus network landscape over that 4 years, or slightly around that 4 years, was probably COVID. None of us could have predicted that. Other things may come or go. There are just so many different elements, and we need to make sure that we in the end build a system which is resilient and serves the people of Cambridgeshire. I think partly as a result of COVID, but also just over the course of kind of as a reflection of what's happened over many, many years, there is currently more public money flowing into the bus network than has been the case for a very long time. And the current system, which clearly is not sustainable, leaves an enormous amount of it gives a lot of public money flowing into private companies with relatively little control over what the private companies do with the routes that they run. And the difference for me, the biggest difference between the enhanced partnership model and the franchise model is the greater degree of control that the combined authority will have. And the combined authority kind of as a place where there is democratic accountability and accountability to the people of Cambridgeshire for public money which is being spent on their behalf. Franchising gives much more control to this organisation in order to be able to think about where we want bus routes running, how we want them to run, how they probably serve communities and the needs of communities, not just the needs of private companies. And I think that's important. But it will, the way in which it also brings significant risks, because it will mean that this organisation will need to become a competent organisation in managing managing and contracting, managing bus networks in a way that it isn't at the moment. I mean, we have a tiny team at the moment who are trying to manage the number of contracts we have. If we go down the franchising route, that will need to change. Otherwise, we will not be able to do it effectively. Having listened to lots of meetings, including the overview and scrutiny meeting where this was discussed at enormous length, I think that the franchising model is the right one, but I think we will need to move into that model with care and be mindful of the very significant responsibility that this organisation will be taking on if we go down that route. It will become a huge thing for this organisation to run. And if that's what happens, we will all have to take responsibility for making sure that it works out for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. I'd like to agree with just about everything that Lucy said, apart from her conclusion. But I think she has pointed out very many of the issues that we have here. And the democratic accountability is a particularly important one, because assuming we go ahead with franchising and assuming we go ahead with this particular scheme as set out in Appendix 5, which I'm not happy about personally, but if we were to do so, we're still not talking about franchising being fully effective by the time that every single one of the constituent authorities here will have been abolished. So we have to look at how there is democratic accountability in the that is quite soon, as Councillor Netzinger correctly says. So we have to think about how the democratic accountability of all of this works. And Councillor Netzinger was particularly correct to say about our inability at this time, and you wouldn't expect it any other way given the number of stuff we have dealing with this, our inability at this time to deal with various things to do with procurement, to do with management and a whole host of other things. I don't have any problem with the stuff that we have at the moment and the work that they do. What I do have a problem with and have had a problem with as far as we've been dealing with subsidised bus services is what we do as a board under the Mayor's leadership. And I think we as a board under the Mayor's leadership have failed abysmally because we've intervened too much for political, not party political, for political purposes, rather than looking at the commerciality of running a bus service. And if this board were to continue in the future to operate in that way, I think that it would be a disastrous. Whether we went down the enhanced partnership route or we went down the franchising route, doesn't matter. I think it would actually be utterly disastrous for us. And we have to establish principles, but then we need to let the professionals get on with doing the detail. And for any of us to come in and say, well, I must demand that I continue to have my bus from point A to point B, is not the way in which what used to be called a passenger transport executive, it's not the way in which a public body which controls a bus service is meant to operate. So there would need to be a significant change of attitude from this board as a whole. I'm not naming any names, not trying to, but we would have to have a very different attitude when it comes to the decision-making and the governance and ownership of the system as a whole. And that's partly why, as things currently stand, I'm just not happy about what's suggested in Appendix 5. There are other methods of looking at franchising and operating franchising. As has already been said by Judith, there are a lot of nudges which may take place, and I submit that some of those nudges may be stronger than Judith has suggested, but that's for the future board to decide, both in terms of the future mayor and in terms of the replacement of all of us who are here from constituent authorities who will not be here in the very near future, at least not representing those constituent authorities which will no longer exist.
In defence of the board, Chris, so I'm going to defend you. I mean, you mentioned you'd made decisions as a board always on commerciality. And I always thought that when I'd listened to you as a board, you did take social value into consideration with some of the decisions we've made along the way. I'll let others speak to that point. But thank you for the point you make, and particularly with regard to local government reform. Over to you, Rob, because obviously you mentioned something there about capacity, and so I think it's only fair that we bring in.
So I mean, I think the points that have been made about the expertise to deliver franchising and what we will need are fair ones, and obviously it would be wrong if I had a team hiding upstairs ready to do franchising before a decision is made. So clearly I haven't. But I think what's set out in the report, which, you know, the work streams that Judith has talked about are really important depending on the decision of the board and a decision of the mayor and when that happens. We're really clear, I'm really clear that we will, you know, depending on what route we go down, you go down, we will need to change some of the way we operate as an organisation, and we will need different skill sets. And Andrew and Judith know that as well. And that will cover a number of those things that have been touched on. But if you look in the work streams, there's also a work stream on policy and governance, which will be back to some of what Councillor Bowden is talking about, which is coming back to then what are the principles and policy of the combined authority with the model that you may decide to go down, right? I've got to be very careful because you've got to make a decision today and the mayor's got to make a decision. And I think at the same time, me building that team to be able to deliver whatever that direction is really, really important. And I think those are the types of things that will come back to board or appropriate committees depending on where they are. So, you know, and I'm talking to my equivalents in West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire and Manchester. You know, Manchester obviously already implemented. South Yorkshire and West Yorkshire are about 6 months or so ahead of us. So it's quite useful to just understand what they're doing. There's other conversations to be had, because you'll look at different models about how decisions around bus services are then made. Do they come to a board? Do you have a separate setup or committee? There's loads of things that need to be worked through, and you as a group of members will make those decisions, not me, but we'll put all those options in front of you, subject to what else goes on this morning or into this afternoon, and then when the mayor does or doesn't make a decision based on what you say. But I want to just give you reassurance that we are planning that through, and we will share with you at the appropriate times those next steps, because it's really important, based on what you do, that we then implement whatever in the right way and allow you to make those right decisions.
Al Kingsley from the Business Board, you indicated you wanted to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Listening intently to one of those conversations where actually all of the perspectives shared have got a lot of validity in terms of how do you unpick that. I think there's a slight concern here. Certainly, we've discussed at the business board and absolutely have a consensus on this position. There is a what and a why on this. The why is, in my view, is the fundamental, because there is a risk if once we know there's a need and there's the relative benefits there is to social equity, to access to skills and training, access to business. It would be very easy to consider what might change on the landscape. Will we change government? Will we change leadership? Will we change our council structures? From a business board looking at it from does this become one of the levers to help grow in our region? There is no regard for what colour rosette or how many rosettes cover our region. If the need and the demand is there, then the landscape may change, but the arguments for it should still stand up. There's then the second part for me, which is the how bit, and that's looking at the proposal. And there is definitely strengths, whilst both carry risk. You know, business board perspective is there's some big numbers there. There's a risk. How do we mitigate and find evidence of impact that would be offset to that? In terms of an ecosystem, there has to be more strength from a commercial perspective for the combined authority to franchise so that it can control, probably most importantly, that it can actually protect and grow sustainability of providers, which is something that I think was fundamental to anything that could scale. Don't necessarily purport to some of the 40-year modelling, because I think any of us who want to know what the transport approach scale might be in 10 years from now, what the delivery vehicle may be, is something in an ever-changing landscape that's harder. So you have to judge on what do we know now, what's happening in other regions. And so whilst there are risks, and I think there's been some really constructive points of risks, and I would hope the franchise model can still, and there's clearly an appetite to continue to refine and revise that model, there's definitely perspective that the reward outweighs the risks on this approach.
Thank you, Al. I'm going to come to Bridget and then come to Councillor Bailey-Anna.
Thank you very much. So I've got 2 points. I'd like to just respond to Councillor Bowden's point. So, absolutely agree. Once this is up and running and it becomes an operational matter, actually, we do, our responsibility is very much kind of that of a board oversight and not interference in the minutiae of operational matters. I think in defence of us all, and I'm looking here at page 54 onwards, which is the responses from each of our councils. What we have all addressed, and what when we're talking about loss of services in our own area and what the needs of our own area are. Actually, what we're addressing is the why that Al's just talked about. And of course, we all have to go back to our own districts, justify the decision that we're making today, for some of us to justify the mayoral precept as well, by being able to say to people that actually they're going to get something out of this. And that actually we are individually making decisions that are in the best interest of the people who vote for us. So I think, I don't think we've been interfering and parochial about it. I think it's been really important for us all to understand each other's needs. So, I mean, I think it talks about, is in Fenland, about 85% loss of service or something. But, so there's really useful information here. So it's really important we all understand what each other's challenges are and what, as well as the why, the what we all want to get out of it. And it's slightly different for all of us, actually. If you read it, these are really interesting statements. If I may, Mayor, I just want a point of clarification over safety. So my understanding then is that if we own anything such as a depot and bus shelters, obviously we have a safety responsibility over that. The responsibility, we are commissioning with private sector bus operators, the responsibility for their services as far as safety concerns surely rests entirely with them. So our role will be just to make sure that they have all the right procedures and documentation in place. I'm just a bit concerned that we might be taking on a responsibility that is actually not ours because it's the operators.
I'll let maybe Judith and Andrew come in, but I just as a point of clarity, I think it is an input. I was delighted, along with the other things that have been mentioned in terms of feedback. A lot of this is my understanding, and again, I'm here to listen. This was something that's been learned in other examples, other areas, particularly Greater Manchester, and in conversations that have been had with myself and officers when the model was proposed. One of the things that was suggested was that they hadn't had a focus on the idea of safe travel and sort of the importance of, in order to increase ridership, one of the things you had to acknowledge that the people who are using buses are often the very youngest, more often to be female and maybe older. And as such, one of the things that people, and I think this is true across the country, is sometimes where people are not so keen to use buses is they're perceived as not being necessarily the safest, as opposed to jumping in a car in your own environment where you can guarantee you're going to get from A to B, in a quicker time, but without the threat of some sort of outside. So I think I'll let them come in.
Come back on you just.
I'm happy to.
But surely our responsibility is to make sure that as far as the actual buses are concerned, and people on buses, that is, the bus operators have all those things in place, So I think it's important. And obviously, I would acknowledge there are operators in this area who are already taking steps to, particularly around the safety of their passengers. But I think the point you're making, as I'm hearing, is about the safety of making sure that the engines are maintained. No. It's about more than that. Making sure that the drivers know how to deal with issues and things like that. But I just don't want us taking on a responsibility that isn't ours. Is actually the operators.
Sorry, Rob's indicating he might come in first, and I'll come to you.
So all I wanted to add, I think there's a mixture of things under the name of the word safety. So there is things like the Mayor has referred to around the buses, and are they running and are they safe? Like all the things you'd expect for vehicles, etc. Then there is, and there will be an onus on bus operators in terms of safety on buses. But as you probably have seen, we do have some buses going around with very clear messages and I'm sure if Daryl, the Police and Crime Commissioner, was here, he's done some work with some of the bus operators, because one of the themes that's come through really clear is, in order for your bus service, regardless of whether it's enhanced partnership or it's franchising, to be successful, you need to have patronage. And we know that. We talked about the COVID impact. And one of the key things that we've had as feedback from other areas actually is, yes, fares are important and what they cost to people, but the safety on buses for individuals, especially in evenings, especially, and let's be clear, if you're a female traveller, etc., is actually incredibly important to whatever you take forward. So I think that's why we need to work with, whatever you make as decisions today, we need to work with those bus operators in whatever that looks like going forward, to support them to ensure that can work. So it's not so much an onus that we have to solve it, but I think that's part of what's come through the consultation and discussions with other areas about actually that is as important, and maybe in some areas has been more important than the price it costs to get on the bus and have that journey that you're going to do. So hopefully that helps Councillor Smith about why it's there. It's a number of factors which are really important, I think, for users.
Do you want to add into that, Judith?
I think the only thing I would do, and thank you, Rob, would be to add that what we're thinking about is those 8 work streams operating across the system, and making sure they're baked in from the beginning in terms of the thinking. So what we would be doing, because quite right, we must not overreach. We need to make sure that responsibility is in the right place. And so what that's doing is saying that within the contract management that we've got, within the contracts, within the procurement, within the risk management, we'll be thinking about safety from the beginning. But it doesn't mean that we'll be doing it. It means that we're flagging it, that it needs to be done.
Councillor Bowden, is this on this point? Yep.
It is. It may be helpful to Councillor Smith. As Rob said, there are a number of different aspects to safety, whether you're talking about the individual safety of passengers at bus stops and on buses, to the safety of the operation of the service itself. But to the extent that we're talking about the safety of the operation itself and the service, it has to be said that we can rely to a great extent upon the work of the traffic commissioners, because the traffic commissioners are the ones who effectively regulate bus and heavy goods vehicles operators in this country, and as a former chairman of a large HGV operation, I can tell you they regulate very heavily indeed, and they regulate in terms of the servicing of the vehicles. They regulate in terms of the way in which the employees work and whether they work within legal hours or not. They even regulate in terms of the financial viability and health of the company concerned. And I think that it's very often not realised how much work the traffic commissioners do in order to ensure that there is safe operation and reliable operation of a bus, or for that matter, an HGV operation. So to that extent, I hope that those comments may be helpful to Councillor Bridget Smith.
I think we've covered that one. Is this a new point? Or sorry, you've indicated you want to speak, Lucy, so please come in.
It's a very brief point.
Yeah, fine, please. No, it's fine. No.
And it was just really to say that I think on the whole, public transport in this country is incredibly safe in comparison with either car or pedestrian or cycle transport. And that's, I mean, making people feel safe at bus stops, I think, is an absolutely critical point to encouraging usage. And that is something that the Combined Authority will need to consider, given that there's a goal of increasing ridership that will, regardless of the mechanism, that will be a really important point. But the problem, the lack of safety about not having any kind of public transport in your area is much worse. And so that goal of increasing ridership should be the thing that we're thinking about. And an awful lot of it is about perception, because actually one of the least safe things you can do is ride a bike on a country road. Thank you.
Right. I'm conscious some people, I'm not saying you have to speak, but I'm obviously grateful for all the contributions so far. John, could I maybe ask you to come in from an integrated care board point of view?
Yeah, so thank you, Mayor. Briefly, I mean, I guess our starting point is what's going to sort of maximise the opportunity in terms of access to health and care services for patients. Bus services are critical to that, but they're also critical for all of our staff in terms of the services that they provide. As others have said, clearly that depends upon greater control and influence. Both models offer some advantages in that regard. To the degree that I think health organisations have responded, I think there is a view that the prize around greater control and influence from franchising is attractive in terms of trying to secure those objectives. But of course, recognising that one has to mitigate the risks both financially and in terms of organisational capacity that have been exhibited this morning. But so people haven't drilled into that question in great detail, but to the degree that they have, I think people are attracted by the greater control and influence that franchising brings.
Thank you, John. Councillor Bailey, Anna.
Thank you. So I'd also like to thank officers for their work. They've carried it out under with a lot of competing demands on their time. So I do think franchising can be one answer to the transport woes of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And of course, I've noted the outcome of the consultation, but you know, it's not and cannot be the only answer. And to be clear, I support improvements to bus services. I've sat many times at this very table and advocated for bus services. I've also advocated for the cancellation or amendments to appallingly underperforming services, all of which have fallen on deaf ears because we've sat around this table and meddled, frankly. We've done exactly what we said we shouldn't do. And so I massively align myself with the comments of Councillor Bowden and Councillor Smith, I noted on that point. You know, we have to set the principles and not meddle with the detail. And unfortunately, we don't have a great record on that front because we set a principle of a £12 per passenger journey benchmark and completely and utterly ignored it in everything that we do, which is not a great start. Clearly, in East Cambridgeshire, there's a number of areas that are very poorly served by bus services in terms of available routes and frequencies and days of travel, etc. We obviously have low population density. We've got longer distance to travel. We've got pothole-filled roads, all the rest of it. You know, it's very challenging providing services in those environments. Franchising, I think, potentially provides a mechanism to address some of that. You know, and that's particularly useful in areas where routes, you know, aren't commercially viable, but, you know, clearly essential for deprivation purposes and maintaining connectivity. For me, the value for money measures that are used in the modelling, I think, we've concluded at East Cambs that it does, it appears to support the case that franchising is the highest value for money option. But it's also costlier and, heavier risk, as we've all identified. I do think personally that further work is required, and maybe this is part of the plan, to fully understand the residual risks and uncertainties that are within the business case. Personally, I think it should be done before a final decision is taken. And just on a particular point of detail, because I rather suspect the Mayor will be making a positive decision to go ahead, I want to make a plea. I believe the plan assumes that the combined authority wouldn't be providing depot facilities for the smaller lots. So I want to, and I noted what Judith said about flexibility around this. So I want to ask that operators of the smaller lots should be able to get access to the CPCA provided depot so that they're not disadvantaged in being able to bid for lots. For me, what hasn't really become clear, and to the public, is what a revised network would really actually look like on the ground. What's it really going to mean? The reality is, in terms of money, that actually very little extra money per annum is included in the business case beyond what we're already spending. This isn't going to, as somebody else recognised, this isn't going to deliver an all singing, all dancing service for residents. And I hope that that is not the expectation of the public. And there's something around £2 million per annum is going to be spent on just running the system, the bureaucracy, the back office, having the necessary staff with the necessary skills. So, I really haven't seen how this is actually reality going to benefit the rural areas. And I haven't seen any commitment to that around this table. So I know the theory's there, but the commitment isn't yet. I do have a number of concerns about the information in the model and the decision we're being asked to make today to offer our advice to the Mayor for his consideration, which obviously it's his decision alone. This plan includes more borrowing. It includes raising £637 million through the life cycle of the model. In the model, I recognise that's only the model. There are choices to be made, but through the Mayor's precept. So that's council tax over the next 30 years, and that there is no upper limit. There's a recognition there's no upper limit on that. The plan also relies on a reduction of car mileage by 15%. So this is the detail of the model that we are being asked to, sign off this decision on. And it makes an assumption that car mileage will reduce by 15%. And it also makes an assumption of doubling of bus passengers in order to stack up with the finances of this. Bus patronage is declining. It's not increasing. It's not a way that people are choosing to travel. And that 15% figure only includes the growth figures that were in the local plans as they were a number of years ago when we were developing the local transport plan and getting all the data for that. And our entire area has been given massively increased growth targets. And I know South Cambs is feeling the pain of that today. And we know that the government's got a plan to deliver 150,000 new homes over a period of time in Greater Cambridge alone that are not in those assumption figures. Now, you can obviously argue that makes the need for a better public transport system even greater, and it obviously does, but it is not there in the modelling. It's not there in the assumptions. And when the assumptions don't come to pass, because frankly, the idea of doubling passenger journeys, cutting down by 15%, with the growth of our area, etc., it is absolute fantasy. It's not right. So what happens? What happens when the assumptions don't come to pass? What happens is that the costs go up. That's the reality. And what happens then is that taxpayers are charged more because they are our only bailout mechanism. Maybe the government will start throwing money at us to run bus services, but I highly doubt it because the national challenges are massive. You've only got to look to the London Mayor and the Manchester Mayor, and of course our Mayor of recent years to see what happens to the precept. It only ever goes upwards. And the challenges in Cambridge and Peterborough are very, very different to those of London and Greater Manchester. Just want to ask, who came here today by bus? You see now, that is the problem. That is the problem. If even we in this room can't be persuaded why we should choose to get on a bus, why are other people going to be persuaded? We all travel in our cars every day. That's the reality. We're no more special or peculiar than anyone else. Most people want to jump in their car because they have complicated lives with complex travel journeys, and they've got to drop the kids off to school, they've got to pick up their shopping on the way home, all of those challenges. So franchising alone doesn't fix the problem with buses. Only money can do that. And for me, there is something here that this is such a massive decision with such massive implications, particularly for the resources of our organisation, that this is distracting from what we really need, which is a modern, fit for purpose, mass transport, public transport system. And buses are never going to be that. They are important. They are not the answer. So more than anything at all, because I truly could be persuaded to support franchising with the right modelling, the right assumptions, the realistic assumptions. But most of all, and I've said it before, so you're not going to be surprised, I disagree with taking this decision right now. We're 12 weeks away from a mayoral election, and I may have missed it, but I believe the current mayor hasn't yet been reselected by his party. We don't know whether he's restanding, whether he'll be here in the future. We don't know who will be here. And I think it's self-evident that the preoccupation with buses in this administration has resulted in no other plan coming forward for more ambitious solutions to the public transport needs of our area. There are no other plans before us. We've heard that there's a statutory process to go through should a future mayor decide that this isn't their priority and want to revoke this decision. And the monitoring officer said it's not easily undone. So, it's a process with money, with resources. So in a nutshell, it really is a bit of a one-way street, this decision, which is why I'm saying this today, because I strongly believe, and this is my overriding objection today, that this is a very far-reaching decision which will have significant consequences for the CPCA and its budget and its precept going forward, and of course for the people and businesses of the area. And I don't believe that this decision is right to take before the mayoral election in just 12 weeks' time, and until the policy aims and objectives of the new mayor are clear, or whoever the mayor is are clear. And this decision should be taken by whoever is in that seat after the election in just 12 weeks' time. So I'm not going to support this here today for the reasons I've outlined, but I don't want that to be interpreted as my never wishing to support bus franchising, because it is not that.
Mayor, could I make a quick point of order?
No, not yet. I'm going to speak first. I just want to reassure you, Councillor Bailey, I heard every single word there. I do need to make a very clear point of there is no predetermination. You did allude to that, and there is no predetermination that I've heard. You did.
I really was not suggesting predetermination, Mayor. I'm sorry if it came across as that. I wasn't, to be clear.
No,
I was not suggesting.
The apology is
Wasn't
accepted.
suggesting.
The apology is accepted, but I think it's important that I absolutely make it clear that I am here listening to all the points of view, as very clearly articulated yourself, Councillor Bailey. I think there are many points there which people might want to come in on. I may definitely ask Janice to come in because there's comments being made about mayoral precept funding. And I would just, on the point with regard to, people can discuss themselves, but I would make the observation that most people, I think, want choice in terms of how they choose to get around rather than any specific type of transport. But that's just an observation. And I don't know if that's on that note. Can I let Councillor Smith come in?
Thank you. So, so choice is lovely, and it's lovely for people like us, but a lot of people don't have choice. And I think I made this point at the last board meeting. There are a heck of a lot of people living in in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough who don't have choice, and they don't have choice because they don't have money. And, I have young people in my village who cannot do apprenticeships because they can't get into Cambridge to do the day release there. We have, again, in my village, which has actually low car ownership compared to the rest of South Cambridgeshire, people are gravely restricted in where they can get jobs. Unfortunately, we do have jobs in the village, but actually there are a diminishing number of jobs, and there certainly aren't those very many of those aspirational jobs for people to actually improve their quality of life. So I don't think it matters one iota that, we didn't come here by bus, though I think a few of our members came by train because they were able to do that. Now, I had no choice but come by car. too far to cycle and too far to walk. But I did leave my car on the far side of the bridge in order not to bring it into Huntingdon and further pollute Huntingdon, as I always do. So, choice is lovely, but a huge number of people in Cambridge and Peterborough have no choice. And what we are proposing here, be it franchising or enhanced partnerships, is actually giving those people a chance or, a choice. And, all the evidence states, and I've been sent a whole load more by Cambridge Ahead, who I met with Dan Thorpe yesterday on this, a nice study they did. One of the main drivers of poverty and inequality is lack of access to transport and the choices that transport opens up. And one of the quickest fixes to deal with inequality and poverty is to provide good, reliable, affordable public transport. So this isn't about us. It's about those people who are not as fortunate in life as us. And I think it's a real shame. We were doing terribly well about being non-political as a board. And I hope we can go back to being non-political, because actually we're far more productive when we behave like that.
I'm going to, Judith, I think you should come in, as obviously you presented the paper. There was quite a few issues there, which obviously can talk to and maybe promote some more conversation. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And also Janice was going to speak about the precept issue as well. So I just wanted to pick up on, I think, three of Councillor Bailey's points. The first was regarding the passenger numbers. And obviously, as we know, nationally, there has been a decline. That there hasn't been that. Although there has been a decline since COVID, the level of decline seen nationally hasn't been seen here. But clearly there is a lot of work to do to achieve the doubling in passengers. And clearly what we have seen is that by focusing on frequency, fare, safety, and some of the other things that we focused on in our implementation and the modelling that's been done with ITP and that we've been looking at over the past year are all key factors in driving more people onto the buses. Clearly the quality of the buses and what we need to do is very important, and all of that needs to be factored into the commercial procurement strategy that we have. Obviously, one of the issues that we had within the plan, and as we've said, a 30-year business plan clearly has it's important to think over the longer scale, but obviously it's not going to predict everything. It could only be based on the local plan growth that is there now. So we could not factor in the growth that is over and beyond what is in current local plans. So the view of the assessment is that it's actually quite pessimistic in terms of population growth. So we do have that as a factor which will enable us to drive passengers and drive fares. And I think that obviously the size of the fare box increases with the number of passengers going on it. Clearly there is much work to be done, but I think that's a helpful starting point for that work. I just wanted to raise a point of clarity on the 15%, as we spoke earlier, regarding the one of the objectives of the local transport and connectivity plan is to reduce car mileage by 15%. And obviously that has been factored into this modelling, but it would be one of the considerations that we would be doing, because obviously if there is a shift from cars to buses, we would be looking to achieve that goal. What I was going to do as well, you mentioned the network, and clearly the basis, there is considerable work going on the network. And indeed, what I'd like to do is just ask my colleague Andrew to speak about the work that's happening on the network, both mapping what we have now and the thinking that can happen around, once you understand what you've got now, how you can drive efficiencies and effectiveness, as indeed they have done and are looking at doing in Wales and in Northern Ireland, in order to get better value out of the existing network. And if I could also ask Andrew for you to pick up the particular point about the depots, because it's particularly important that actually the reason that we have a depot strategy is to enable the participation of small and medium-sized operators in these procurement opportunities.
Over to you, Andrew. Some important clarifications there.
Thank you, Judith. So I think in terms of network design, we're proposing to bring a paper to the next TICM board in terms of mapping the existing network fully for the purposes of those practical plannings for implementation planning. The model in the assessment took an approach to that improvement, by looking at, on average, a 15% increase in mileage for the network in a franchising and an EP scenario, and then looked at the benefits that were derived from that, and that shifted some of the outputs in terms of modal shift from cars and such. So what we're planning to do, if the decision is made from an implementation planning perspective, is, as Councillor Bailey and I think Councillor Boda referenced, try and bring that to life a bit more in terms of what that means practically for residents. Obviously, the modelling has taken an approach to categorising those services and improving frequencies. In reality, that might be subject to obviously slight differences in terms of the region and what wish to go forward based on some of those guidelines. But that was the approach taken in the model to inform that. The other key point, probably just to reference that, because I know rural connectivity was mentioned. I think that the response report in 7.5.5 makes reference to this, that sort of in the current model, operators can make high margins on the most profitable routes while seeking funding to support non-commercial routes. And we know that most non-commercial routes are likely to be in rural and town areas. There are a few exceptions, but most of them are. So franchising has sort of been assessed in that way, and as an EP, in terms of the benefits that would provide. In terms of depots, the depot strategy is sort of underpinning the larger lots, particularly in Cambridge and Peterborough. The reason for that, having worked up the assessment and some of the guidance, was looking at the Markets and Competition Authority guidance around best value for money for the public sector in terms of looking at a franchising scheme. That at the moment, I don't think it's unfair to say that our large incumbent operator has quite a large incumbent advantage if contracts came out in a franchise environment. So the reason facilitating those depots for the larger lots is to try and encourage that and reduce that barrier to entry for other operators who might want to invest in the region, and also some of our SMEs who might want to expand and grow and sort of develop their opportunities. So I think it's detailed, I'll find the exact part in the response report around how SMEs could take advantage of those opportunities as well. It was felt when preparing that depot strategy that SMEs actually have quite a good incumbent advantage for those smaller lots because they already have a depot. But we need to make sure that transfer of responsibility when they're bidding in a franchise scenario between the larger companies and the smaller companies is fair.
I'm going to go to Janice on the point about I asked about finances and everything. Janice, if you can come in, please.
Thank you, Chair. The borrowing obviously is to support the depot acquisition as well as bus priority infrastructure improvements that are part of this, and to help the flow of the buses as well as support competition within the market for that. In terms of the precept, whether it's enhanced partnership or bus franchising, it is investment in buses. So both will result in implications for the precept. The reason we are looking at things like the precept or the council or the transport levy is because that we're only allowed to look at finances that were in our control. So that's the reason it may appear that it's such a significant impact on the precept. As we know, though, the board does have the authority to approve the precept each year, so those discussions will be had each year at board as well to discuss what precept is available. And just to point out as well, just to clarify, because I know there's been some comments about it, that the business case was based on a precept of £12 and it was looking at those increases that will be over the years. Obviously the precept is at £36 now when we're looking about where we are with it. So those increases, will it be going to an absolute amount percentage wise? It isn't as significant perhaps as it may appear. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Anna, you said you wanted to come
I just wanted to come back on something Bridget said, because she seemed to be saying, and sorry if I've misinterpreted it, but what I heard her say was that this isn't for people like us. We're not doing it for people like us. And the reality is that most people are like us. Yes, there are lots of people who want to use bus services, and we need to provide better bus services. That isn't what's under discussion here. The point I was trying to make was that the modelling assumes the assumptions that are made in our local transport plan, which is that 15% less car journeys, which means that people like us have got to get out of our cars, and therefore we've got to find a different way of travelling, and buses can be one of those answers. And so that is why I asked people today, who's come here on a bus? I could have said it yesterday. We could have been in a different room, but not very often people put their hands up. I've done that quite often, and people don't do it. And that's the point. And the point I'm making is I don't believe the 15% figure. I don't believe the doubling of passengers on which this model is based. And that's my problem.
Councillor Bowden, you wanted to come in again.
Thank you. Oh, thank you oh, sorry, if Sam wants to speak. No, you're the boss, Mayor. I do have to accept the comment just made by Councillor Bailey. It is, we are basing these assumptions on a 15% modal shift, which is, with all due respect, not backed up by any evidence. And in fact, the evidence which exists is that people will continue to prefer to use their cars rather than buses, generally. And I say generally because I've come across people in my own ward that I represent in Whittlesea. I've come across people who said, I'd love to get the bus to and from Peterborough, but I can't rely on the last bus actually running, so I can't rely on using the bus. And that's why I use my car to get into and out of Peterborough and have to pay in Peterborough for parking. They don't want to do it, but they're forced to, or they feel they're forced to, because of the inadequacy of the service. And the problem is that for a service to be adequate on a standard route, it needs to cater to all people. It needs to cater to people who have their shifts starting at 8 o'clock in the morning at Peterborough Hospital. It needs to cover all sorts of people with all sorts of needs. And that's a massively difficult thing to do unless you have a very, very frequent service, which is very expensive and not cost effective. It's a very difficult thing to do. And you know, Mayor, in fact, all this board knows my commitment to buses and my liking of buses, especially those old route masters. And I'm second to no one here in the use of buses. But I took up, it wasn't Anna's challenge, I took up the challenge once for my own purposes when County Hall in Cambridge was still the place where we met for county council meetings. I decided one day, I'm going to go by bus this time to rather than use my car. And much though I enjoyed all the bus journeys, it was absolutely impractical for me to do that on a regular basis. It took 3 times, 4 times as long as would otherwise be the case. And really, for anyone, not merely someone who happens to be on this board, for anyone, that sort of difference between the practicality of a car and a bus will cause them to make certain choices. Now, one of the things I'm unhappy about the consultation which took place is that it wasn't a consultation between franchising and enhanced partnership. If it had been, and we're not in fact faced with a choice today between franchising and enhanced partnership. If we were, I'd probably be quite happy to support franchising. What it was, despite the fact that the report makes it quite clear at the beginning of the report that there are several versions of franchising which are possible, despite that fact, we ended up with just dealing with one scheme, with one proposed method of franchising. And that is what we're being asked to vote on today, as is in Appendix 5. And the report makes its recommendation about the proposed franchising scheme rather than franchising as a principle. And it's because of that, it's because I just cannot, I regard the scheme as is currently shown as having too great a risk for us, which hasn't been satisfactorily mitigated. That's why I feel unable to support this particular proposal, even though I'm perfectly happy with franchising. And I'm delighted to hear what Judith said, that there will be substantial possibility for this board over the course of the next few years to change what we've got listed here as the scheme to something which may be more workable and maybe less risky than we've got, and maybe gets closer to one of the other schemes, which is mentioned, franchising schemes, which is mentioned at the very beginning of the report. So that's why, Mayor, I'll be opposing this, not because I oppose franchising in principle, because I don't, but I do oppose the proposed scheme, which we've got in Appendix 5. And I'm sorry that we're not being asked just to choose between enhanced partnership and franchising. It's a choice we've got to make. Either choice can be made to work. Personally, if I were in charge, I'd be much more happy to do franchising than enhanced partnership because of my love of buses. That's a separate matter. But I'm really quite disappointed that we've been forced down a route between just one narrow franchising scheme and enhanced partnerships as opposed to a wider choice. Coming back to the comment made by Councillor Smith and also bus usage and people's propensity to use buses or not, some of this will be down to Councillor Smith and her successors. because I imagine that the vast majority of the increase in population which is going to take place within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough over the next 10 or 20 years is likely to be in what is now South Cambridgeshire, on the basis of what I've seen so far. And the way in which that development takes place can have a massive effect on whether or not buses will be a more preferred route for people to use than the private car. Now, I'm not advocating putting barriers in the way of people using private cars. What I'm advocating is putting enhancements in the way of people using buses so that buses can better achieve the needs that individuals have got to get from where they are in place A to where they need to be in place B and back. And you look at some of the new towns over the last 50 years, 60 years, and their different approaches. Some of them, with all due respect, such as Peterborough and Milton Keynes, they've based themselves around the car, with the bus being very much secondary thought, if thought of at all. You look at another example, for example, Runcorn New Town in, what now was New Town, in Cheshire. And there, all the new estates were linked by busways, and the busways are straight. Well, they're curved, but they're direct services which are within easy walking distance of everyone in each of the areas concerned, and no one in their right mind uses a car rather than a bus when the bus is so convenient and reliable and is so practical for them. So, with respect to Councillor Smith, and I don't mean to this at you personally, but it is you and your successors and how you determine how those new developments are built who can manage to push forward the concept of people primarily using buses rather than cars, especially for short journeys and especially for those journeys they've got to make to work and back.
Okay, I'm going to come to some officers in a moment, and you can maybe clarify on the point that I think Councillor Bowden was making with regard to the process of the consultation, which I'll bring you in on, Ed, and the actual way we had to set up. As far as I understand it, that we're just following section 123G1 of the Transport Act 2000 and as amended by the Bus Services Act of 2017 by the Conservative government. So I would be directed by the Conservative government's approach to how we take bus services reform forward. Over to you.
Yes, thank you. We've worked very closely with legal advisors and indeed Addleshaw Goddard to make sure that both the assessment that we brought in July and then the consultation that we prepared and undertook during the autumn was compliant with the legislation. And obviously, in addition to that, before we were able to go out to consultation, we had to go through the Grant Thornton independent audit. And so they were able to verify, and indeed we wouldn't have passed the audit unless they were content that both the data that we had used and the way that it was used was adequate for the assessment. So that assessment was concluded, we had that advice, and then obviously we went out to consultation. And the nature of the consultation, and I perhaps bring in Ed here to give some details, but that we needed to follow the principles of any public sector consultation. But in this particular case, we also had to follow the acts that you've just set out, Chair.
Over to you, Ed. Consultation has been an important part of this all the way along, and thank you again for the work you and your team have done. So,
thank you, Mayor. So, yes, some reassurance that the consultation does give respondents the opportunity to compare the proposed franchising scheme to elements of an enhanced partnership. That is what's required by the Act and the process that has been followed by other mayoral combined authorities that have gone through this process. So the consultation document that was produced summarises the proposed franchising scheme and then compares elements of the proposed franchising scheme to an enhanced partnership. So we are comparing both a medium level enhanced partnership and a medium level proposed franchising scheme, as Judith said, to satisfy the audit process. The consultation was carried out in accordance with the legislation, but also based on learning and conversations with other mayoral combined authorities that have been through this process. So we were in a slightly fortunate position where we could learn from colleagues in other areas of the country. We spent time engaging with West Yorkshire, Greater Manchester to look at what had worked in those areas, to see how we could build on consultations that had gone before us. We had some advice from Mike Bartram, who was a fellow of the Institute for Consultation, but had been heavily involved in previous consultations like this for Greater Manchester, for Liverpool City region, and for Transport for London as well, working with us throughout to quality assure both the planning and the delivery of that consultation. And I think it's worth just reflecting on sort of the wider point, which is while the consultation serves a very specific purpose as prescribed in the Act and the legislation, it was also an opportunity for us to gain a really deep and meaningful insight from a wider audience. You know, it's certainly the largest piece of consultation and engagement that the organisation has ever done. So while this consultation has served a specific purpose in terms of helping to inform the discussion today and any future decision, it's also given the organisation a huge amount of insight from residents, businesses, stakeholders about the network, about both the proposals, but also wider connectivity as well. And I think the challenge for us going forward, regardless of this decision necessarily, is how do we use that insight and how do we continue to engage with people that have been part of this consultation in shaping future connectivity as well?
Thank you. Just going to take a break. And just, I'm conscious we've been talking for quite, yes, Councillor Bowden. I'm actually going to propose that we have a 10-minute break, and we can, no, we can come back. We're having a break for a reason. I think people just need some headspace, and we need some time to get a drink of water, have a comfort break. Could I just get a feeling? I know you obviously want to come in, Chris. Who can you? Yeah, we're off the thing. Can I just get an idea who else? So it's just right. It's so yeah. So for those watching at home, we are just coming back in. We are still on the same item we were regarding bus reform, and I'm going to you, Councillor Bowden, Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor. I just wanted to respond to the comments made by Judith and by Ed. The first thing is I most definitely didn't suggest or didn't say that the consultation which took place failed to satisfy the legal criteria. I'm not suggesting that for 1 second. What I am saying is maybe it only managed to satisfy the legal criteria and didn't go further as it could and maybe should have done. In particular, the fact that effectively, and it's in the recommendation that we've got a recommendation from the consultation as well, item C on the in our voting, that it just relates to one particular type of scheme for franchising, and I think that limiting factor is very unfortunate. But it is the way it is, and it's presented the way it is, and we have to vote on it the way it is. I fully accept that. I just feel that it's very disappointing that we're left in that position.
Can I mean, just as I guess my question is, my understanding the consultation only could do on one type of franchising against one type. You couldn't, again, this is all in the Conservative Act 2017. Is that not correct?
So the consultation has to compare, has to be a fair and equal comparison between the proposed franchising scheme and an equally medium level enhanced partnership. There were questions in the short form questionnaire. The long form questionnaire in detail encourages consultees to compare specific aspects of the proposed scheme and the proposed or an alternative medium level enhanced partnership. Both questionnaires, though, do give the option for people to provide wider commentary at the schemes on a high level. But the questions are focused on that sort of acid test of comparison, which is the core basis of the consultation and which it was carried out against.
Yeah, and once again, I believe I know in terms of the quality of the consultation, we can do a lot of benchmarking about what's gone before, and in terms of things. So I'll just finish off that piece of discussion about acknowledging the professionalism and hard work of yourself and the team. People who haven't spoken, Councillor Wakeford, you have indicated. Do you want to come in now?
Thank you. Just on Councillor Bailey's comments and most recent exchanges we were having across the table first, I think the car is so often simplest for those lucky enough to have one and to be able to afford to run it, because the structure our buses have operated in is not doing a good enough job of providing the integrated, reliable network that would make getting buses easier more of the time for more people, which is no criticism of the operators doing their best to work in that commercial environment. As a representative of a significantly rural district, I'm under no misapprehension that there's a bus-shaped wand we can wave, or perhaps bus-shaped plastic toy we can deploy, so nobody in rural Huntingdonshire ever needs to use a bus or private, forgive me. So nobody in Huntingdonshire ever has to use private transport ever again. But that's not what this is about today. This is about deciding whether provision of affordable and reliable public transport in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough can move in the right direction or not. And that's why all the work has been done to get us here. So we're trying to ensure that if Councillor Bailey asks her same question she's asked twice already this morning, more times, in more places in future, more people will be able to put their hands up. If anything, the lack of hands today makes the case for the report and the importance of its recommendations to act here. It doesn't undermine it, as I wondered may have been the suggestion. As has been underlined subsequently, again, the decision doesn't lock in particular funding models, as I think the Councillor corrected herself as well. The particular details are in the funding model on which the assessment's been made, but that doesn't constrain how we actually act in future, whoever we is, any more than the modelled assumptions constrained how our area and its population will grow in future. So if we ask the Mayor to refuse to make a decision today and kick the can down the road, then we risk ever more cost or delay or both in making improvements, let alone if we needed to repeat work, update modelling, repeat consultation or anything else. The least risk of that is making a decision sooner while information is freshest. So in terms of our take from Huntingdonshire district more generally, I think this work has clearly been onerous, decisions complex and heavy in detail, and the options have plenty more detail to flesh out, as has been underlined in exchanges across the table, whichever decision the Mayor might make today. But my view and our collective view from the Hunts district seat is that the judgment call before us is actually clear and straightforward. Councillor Smith, the Councillor Smith on my right, as opposed to my left, summarised discussion at Transport and Infrastructure Committee very clearly. And as she said, it was an extremely positive cross-party debate with recommendation in favour, unanimously informed, I trust, by the detailed discussion we had there as well, which has been reflected today. On Councillor Bowden's concerns on commerciality and how the Combined Authority and the board take decisions here, we've chosen to take steps to deal with what I think we can call market failure, which is partly a function of the commercial incentives that do and don't exist in the current operating structure. So inevitably, in view of that structure, steps we've taken have been, to varying extents, limited. Franchising changes the structure of commercial decision-making more significantly than pursuing an enhanced partnership. And I think the report before us makes a compelling case about which structure puts us in the strongest position to deliver an effective and integrated public transport network, to address precisely the needs Al summarised earlier on. And that will put us in a stronger position with a system that we don't need to step down into the weeds of as often. On concerns about democratic accountability, I think what we are accountable for right now is taking the decisions we can make while we have the honour and privilege to represent our communities, regardless of whether we ourselves are here or in the same role or in a different but resembling role in future. My residents won't thank me, I'm quite sure, including when I'm long gone, for ducking difficult decisions. So I will certainly be voting to endorse the recommendation before us to the Mayor. And I'd add my thanks as well to Judith and the entire team involved in this.
Thank you, Sam, Councillor Wakeford. I heard everything. Very clear. Coming back to the other side, so at least two who've not, as the proposer, Anna, do you want to go now? I mean, you always have the chance to speak at the end anyway. So if you do it that, and then if there's any final comment you might want to make. So.
Okay, I've been making quite a few notes, so I do apologise for having quite a few things to say at this point. So I think this debate's been a very long time in coming, and rightly so, because the kind of work that needs to happen to get us to this point is very significant. There are some key issues that I wanted to remind us of today as we go into making that decision, which I think are core to kind of franchising as a whole. And I should say that I'm speaking here with two hats on, both as a representative of Cambridge City and as a lead for transport. And I did want to start, Mayor Dr. Nick, to say whatever the decision you decide to make on this, I wanted to pay tribute to your determination to ensure that all the research and modelling on reforming our buses has taken place, that we are in this position to debate and have this recommendation today, and that is down to your leadership. So thank you. So I said before, it's very bizarre to be transport lead in a strategic transport authority which operates 12% of our buses and none of the trains. And I think we need to bear that in mind because I think control is really key here. There are risks in both models. I think we've seen that really clearly. There are costs in both models. I think it's very foolish of us to assume that if we don't franchise, we will never be asked again to invest in increasing the number or quality of routes that are operated. As Councillor Wakeford said, this isn't about bus versus car, it's about opportunity. And I think it's important to say we aren't drivers or cyclists or bus users. It's not about identities. It's about the choices we make for our journeys and the choices we are able to make. We're not saying that we have to use buses all the time, but franchising improves our network and give us the opportunity to use buses all the time. And I think that's really key. And there's been a lot of discussion, rightly, about rural connectivity and the huge potential that franchising brings to our isolated populations. It would, I think, be remiss of me not to say, as a Cambridge representative, that franchising also benefits the network in urban areas as well. This is a benefit, I believe, looking at the evidence, to our whole region. And a lot of what I'm thinking about in terms of franchising is about control. A good relationship with bus companies is always needed, but an enhanced partnership gives, as we've seen in the paperwork, gives any largest operator a veto, in effect. It doesn't allow that extra level of control in the public interest. And that isn't a comment on any individual operator. That is about the system under which we operate. Now, Councillor Bowden is right to say that professionals are the key to the detail. And I would say that's something that has always happened. Our decisions as a board as to whether invest in services are always guided by the advice of our expert officials. I want to pay tribute to the huge amount of work they do to inform and explain any decision that we may make as a Transport Committee and as a board. With regard to the comments about the use of precepts that I think Councillor Bailey made, I think it's important, and we had this confirmed to us at TIC and has been confirmed to us again today, modelling is just that, it is modelling. We are required to model what's in our control. It absolutely does not mean, and we've had this reassurance on several occasions, it doesn't mean that that is what we have to commit to use. There are a wide range of funding streams available. And of course, as a board, it is still absolutely down to us to recommend any decision that the mayor may make for precepts in the future. But I think a really key point about franchising is that it isn't just about commerciality anyway. It's about balancing that commerciality with the wider needs. And to be honest, I think every single member of this board at some point has asked the mayor to step in to save a service that a commercial company has deemed unviable but is important for our residents. Because the market alone can't solve the issues facing our buses. A franchise system allows us to do things such as make decisions for social value and also, as Al has mentioned, for economic value. We can make plans to grow our economy, to think ahead, to get people into work and training so that more people in our region can benefit from growth and from opportunity. And we've heard that too in terms of access to healthcare. I think that's really important and often overlooked. So under a deregulated system, we cannot plan in advance. It's been one of the huge frustrations being a transport lead that we cannot do that in advance planning. We cannot stop an operator deciding to cut a route or to cut a route right back to the bare bones. To go back to the point of viability, in a deregulated system, we take all of the financial hits on less profitable routes while not being allowed to cross-subsidise for more profitable routes. So actually, it's a much greater hit on viability. Extended partnership doesn't really solve that issue. Now, we've heard from a few people today that our buses aren't good enough right now. Our residents have told us that consistently. They want better buses. Our businesses have told us they want better buses. Our employers have, our schools have, our young people have. And I think for me and for the city that I represent on this board, that's the key part about franchising. Our residents have told us they want better buses. The consultation is 63% in favour. And actually, if you look at the organisational responses, it's 75% in favour. It's a very strong response. And that is why I will be voting in favour of franchising when we get to the vote. A franchise network isn't perfect and it won't be perfect straight away. And I think we need to acknowledge that. If the mayor chooses to make a decision to franchise, it doesn't all change a day after that. It takes time, but it sets that ball rolling. Because it gives us so many more opportunities to do the things that we know our residents, our businesses, our institutions want. And like Councillor Wakeford, quite frankly, I don't think people would forgive us if we say we want to wait longer before making a decision. I think they want us to act. I think we need to get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Councillor Smith, again, very clearly spoken. I've heard what you wanted to say, and I thank you for your input there. Councillor Jones-Dennis as a seconder to this paper.
Thank you, Mayor. there's very little I can add to the debates that I've heard from everyone. There's been some excellent points made, and I'd like to thank the officers for the amount of work that they've put in. As a long-time advocate of franchising, I'd just make it clear from the outset, I will be supporting this. I think the decision needs to be made today. As I'm finding in my own authority, there is no benefit at all to kicking the can down the road for any reason whatsoever. This is about the principle of franchising. This is about obtaining best value. And in an urban conurbation, this isn't also about the car, because if you ride around Peterborough these days, you'll see people on scooters. You know, they're already out the cars. So what we've got to do is as an authority, as politicians, we've got to be able, we've got the fastest rush hour traffic around the country. 20 yeah, no, AA605 notwithstanding, but at 22 miles an hour we have a wonderful road system that buses can operate on and through. We also have busways. So the top and bottom of it is that we must provide choice for people, and I think franchising is the way forward as far as this goes. The principle, I think, has been established both in here and through the consultation. But I think also, you know, the public have spoken, and we should do our level best to make this work as soon as possible and not delay any further. I don't think there's anything else I need to add. I'm being honest. Thank you.
And thank you. And again, Councillor Jones, I note everything you've said there and your positioning. Right. Are there any last comments or questions before we move to the vote? Councillor Bowden.
I wanted to leave this to the very end, Mayor. I am in a dilemma here because I really don't like Appendix 5, which is what we're being asked to vote on, even though I'm very happy with the concept of franchising and moving forward. So it places me in a difficult position. Nevertheless, I'd like to express that when it comes to the vote. However, I just want to get advice from the monitoring officer because I am a trustee of a community transport organisation, as you know. And whilst this matter hasn't been discussed in the community transport organisation, and I have no reason either to believe or not believe that they would play any part in a franchise, I'm just concerned and want to get advice from the monitoring officer about the appropriateness of my voting on these items which we've got in front of us today. As I say, I'm quite keen to exercise my right to vote or abstain, but I do want the advice of the monitoring officer about the remote connection there may be.
Yeah.
Sure. Yes. I think with this, it's an issue where it's, as you said, it's very difficult to foresee what may happen in the future. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion during the debate about some of the small and medium-sized transport organisations. They may fall into the category of one which you're a trustee. How that may affect that in the future is very difficult to know. However, there may be an effect which this has upon the organisation which you're involved in, and as a result of that, at least I think you should have pause to think about whether or not you should be taking part in the vote, and as to whether or not it may be seen that in some way from the impartial observer looking inward as to whether or not that would give you any sort of bias or any or be voting which could cause any benefit to the organisation which you're a part of. So it is something I think which is material for you to consider when deciding whether to take part in the vote or not. Obviously, as you will accept, Councillor, as we normally say, from an MO point of view, it's always a matter for you. But I think you're right to raise it. I think it is an issue which you should give pause and have a think about.
Mayor, whilst I've been extremely careful not to talk about small providers and about community transport when I've been speaking, when it comes to the vote, they are mentioned within the report itself. And I feel very unhappy about it, but I don't feel that I can then vote on the items which do have some connection to community transport, even though, as I say, a fact which I'm a trustee of has no plans at this time to participate.
We'll go through those. Obviously, they'll all be recorded as you see fit. There's several votes that you want to go through. That's fine.
But just to make it clear, I will not participate in the voting. It's not that I'm abstaining. I will not participate in the voting because of the potential of some individuals thinking that I have a prejudicial interest.
Okay. Well, that's obviously you've had a discussion with the monitoring officer. The team will go through every single vote, and as indicated by the monitoring officer, you can act accordingly. Okay, I think there is no more comments to be made. No. In that case, at this point, I'm now going to hand over to, and just, oh, by the way, I will not be voting quite clearly because I am looking to you as the board, having heard all the advice and having heard other things, to, act in accordance with these recommendations, of which one of them is to recommend to myself as mayor. Are you ready, Alison? Take a deep breath. Okay, over to you, Alison.
Okay, thank you very much. So as we've said, we're going to do the votes one recommendation at a time, including the ones that are just to note, and I'm going to do them all as a recorded vote. So I will be reading your names out in alphabetical order for each of them. So recommendation A is to note the completion of the bus reform consultation process, its extent and the responses received, including the discussions and feedback from Transport and Infrastructure Committee and Overview and Scrutiny Committee in January 2025. So Councillor Anna Bailey.
I note it, yes, 4.
Councillor Chris Bowden. You're not voting. Councillor Dennis Jones.
4.
Al Kingsley.
4.
Councillor Lucy Nestlinger.
4.
Councillor Anna Smith.
4.
Councillor Bridget Smith.
4.
Councillor Sam Wakeford.
4.
Thank you very much. So that's unanimous from those voting. Recommendation B is to note the Westco consultation report at Appendix 2. Councillor Anna Bailey.
4.
Councillor Chris Bowden, you're not voting. Councillor Dennis Jones.
4.
Al Kingsley.
4.
Councillor Lucy Nestlinger.
4.
Councillor Anna Smith.
4.
Councillor Bridget Smith.
4.
Councillor Sam Wakeford.
4.
Thank you. So again, that is unanimous for those voting. So recommendation C is to approve the CPCA consultation response report at Appendix 3. Councillor Anna Bailey.
4.
Councillor Chris Bowden, you're not.
4.
Al Kingsley.
4.
Councillor Lucy Nestlinger.
4.
Councillor Anna Smith.
4.
Councillor Bridget Smith.
4.
Sam Wakeford. Sorry, Councillor Sam Wakeford.
I've been called worse. 4.
Again, so that's unanimous for those voting. Recommendation D is to recommend to the mayor that he makes a franchising scheme as set out in Appendix 5, complying with all associated statutory requirements. Councillor Anna Bailey.
Abstain.
Councillor Chris Bowden, you're not voting. Councillor Dennis Jones.
4.
Al Kingsley.
4.
Councillor Lucy Nestlinger.
4.
Councillor Anna Smith.
4.
Councillor Bridget Smith.
4.
Councillor Sam Wakeford.
4.
So that's 6-4 and 1 abstention, so that is carried. So recommendation E, so when the mayor has decided whether or not to make a franchising scheme, to agree to adopt and publish the combined authority's response to the consultation, together with the mayor's decision as the report to be published by the combined authority under section 123G, paragraph 1 of the Transport Act 2000, as amended by the Bus Services Act 2017, in accordance with section 123G, brackets 2 of the Act, to give notice to the Traffic Commissioner. Councillor Anna Bailey.
Abstain.
Councillor Chris Bowden is not voting. Councillor Dennis Jones.
4.
Al Kingsley.
4.
Councillor Lucy.
4. 4.
Councillor Bridget Smith.
4.
Councillor Sam Wakeford.
4.
Thank you. So that is 6-4 and 1 abstention. So that is carried. Recommendation F if the Mayor decides to make a franchising scheme, to publish the scheme set out at Appendix 5 on behalf of the Mayor at the same time as the Westco consultation report and CPCA consultation response report to be published under Section 123G brackets 1 of the Act. At the same time, to publish a transitional notice in the terms set out in Appendix 6, and then within 14 days of the date upon which the transitional notice is published, to give notice to the Traffic Commissioner of its publication on behalf of the Mayor, if the Mayor so decides, or alternatively CPCA, as required by the Public Services Vehicle, Registration of Local Services, Franchising Schemes, Transitional Provisions and Amendments, England Regulations 2018. To agree that in conducting the procurement process for the provision of local services, the combined authority will facilitate the involvement of small and medium-sized operators in the provision of local services as set out in the report Bus Franchising, facilitating the involvement of small and medium-sized operators at Appendix 4 to enable compliance with Section 123G, paragraph 3 of the Act, to commence with the implementation and mobilisation of franchising, noting Section 4.4 of the report, next steps in the event of a mayoral decision to approve franchising. Councillor Anna Bailey.
Abstain.
Councillor Chris Bowden not voting. Councillor Dennis Jones.
4.
Al Kingsley.
4.
Councillor Lucy Nessinger.
4.
Councillor Anna Smith.
4.
Councillor Bridget Smith.
4.
Councillor Sam Wakeford.
4.
Thank you. So again, that's 6-4 and 1 abstention. Recommendation G, if the Mayor decides not to make a franchising scheme, advance the process to implement an enhanced partnership in accordance with sections 138A to 138J of the Act, relevant statutory guidance and supporting legislation, noting section 4.5 of this report, next steps in the event of a mayoral decision not to make a franchising scheme, and to approve the repurposing of the existing development of bus franchising budget to be used for the initial development work for the enhanced partnership. Councillor Anna Bailey.
Abstain.
Councillor Chris Bowden not voting.
On this one, I don't have any prejudicial interest.
Oh, okay. Councillor Chris Bowden.
Abstain.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dennis Jones.
4.
Al Kingsley.
Abstain.
Councillor Lucy Nestinger.
4.
Councillor Anna Smith. 4. Councillor
4.
Councillor Sam Wakeford.
4.
So thank you very much for that one. It was 5-4 and 3 abstentions. So that one is carried.
Thank you, everyone. That's the end of the item. And as I promised, we would now take another break for lunch and some headspace. Thank you. I very much appreciated for all of your Hello again, those who are watching online. Mayor Dr. Nick Johnson here for the final item 10. For those watching and for obviously those in the room, just to following on from the last discussion on bus reform, just to make it clear, obviously I appreciate all the feedback and the recommendation as it stands. I need to now sort of go away. I'm not making an on-record public declaration about my final decision here and now. I need to go and have a conversation with senior officers, particularly around comms, as well as to how the final decision will be managed by the combined authority and how that will be then distributed wider. Hopefully that makes it clear to everybody watching as well. But thank you. I heard all the input from all of you loud and clear. Right, item number 10, which are simply but recommendations from Skills and Employment Committee. The first one we're going to talk about, just for plain clarity, these recommendations have already been debated in detail and approved by our subject experts on the committee at their meeting on the 20th of January. Andrea Wood, as our Assistant and Director of Skills and Employment, is here to give an overview of the recommendations. They are both, I guess we just do them one at a time. So we do the further education cold spots, and over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Mayor. And good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here today to talk to you about the FE Cold Spots programme. So the FE Cold Spots programme is a programme that's been running for quite a long period of time. It has been backwards and forwards to committee and board, and it goes way back to March 2022 when the board actually confirmed £4.8 million of gain share funding to be put forward to the FE Cold Spots programme. So just by definition, a cold spot is an identified ward where participation in education is below average compared to the relative population. And back when the funding was secured, the rationale was put forward to board about cold spots being identified in both St Neots and East Cambridgeshire. And that was informed by not only an analysis of adult learning participation, but also the information that was received through our constituent council at Cambridgeshire County Council that was looking at the post-16 sufficiency strategy and identifying where post-16 places were most needed. So these are geographical, physical places where young people and adults lack physical access to learning opportunities. And so the investment was secured to try and drive a solution around that. Originally, the funding had been identified to pump prime two new FE colleges, one in St Neots and one in East Cambs. But following a very rigorous feasibility programme, which we were supported by with Grant Thornton, it returned that it was not a viable option to set up two brand new FE college estates in those places. So back in July of 2024, the Skills Committee debated various potential solutions and how to move this forward to still address the key issues around the lack of provision in both of those places. And it was recommended and approved by board on the 4th of September that the funding would continue to be used to scale up existing activities across those places. And should there be funding remaining, that we would potentially consider alternative capital investment across the wider region. It was specified at that time that the capital investment would enable the delivery of specific provision linked to key sectors and job vacancies in the area. And for those areas, there was a focus on digital skills, work readiness, employability programmes, but also provision for health and social care, green skills, construction, and work in education. So between September and November, officers went away to build up a programme where we could invite potential expressions of interest from providers to solve the need that we had for both of those places. And following a market engagement, potential bidders were invited to submit expressions of interest for the 4.5 million capital fund available. The expressions of interest were reviewed by officers and Councillor Nasinger and Councillor Wakeford on the 6th of January this year. In total, there was a call of over £11 million on the 4.5 million that was available. There were 8 expressions of interest for the St Neots, totaling 5 million, with programmes ranging from 25,000 to 1.7 million. There were 3 expressions of interest for East Cambridgeshire, totaling 3.4 million and ranging from 225,000 to 1.5 million, and 4 other expressions of interest for other parts of the region, which totalled 3.1 million, and they ranged from 237,000 to 2 million. Overall, the Department for Education has responsibility for post-16 FE capital. They're responsible for the ongoing maintenance of college estates and innovation and growth funding. And it is unusual for combined authorities to be able to invest in this way. And it is truly something the board should be very proud of and being in a position to be doing, and something that they've championed now for a long time. This programme demonstrates a commitment to skills and employment for young people and adults, and it can prove to potentially be a blueprint for us to use for future capital investment. It will allow the board to reflect on the work of the programme and consider capital investment that could be used as leverage to attract capital funding from the Department for Education in the future, and to also explore opportunity for local match funds or asset transfers. And there's also an opportunity for us to develop this programme as a future devolution ask for capital funding, which requires further exploration at this point. Today, the board asked to accept the recommendations that are set out in the paper. This will allow the programme to proceed to application stage and awarding grants to providers that have come forward with proposals to tackle the cold spots in St Neots and East Cambs. It will then move forward to a monitoring phase of over 3 years, where we'll monitor the return on the investment by measuring the unique number of learners that now are able to participate in learning as a result of the investment. I'd be pleased to bring forward future proposals for a potential next cold spot programme that would consider not only cold spots but also parts in our region where our FE estate is full to capacity and where the limitations of FE funding mean that many young people remain out of education, employment and training, and are in desperate need of capital investment to deliver the skills and talents that we need to achieve growth. A systems approach is very much needed for this, and this would need to include conversations with DFE and key partners, and could knit other new opportunities such as our Youth Guarantee Trailblazer into this, so that we can find a long-term and sustainable approach to addressing the challenges that have been identified. But this could be the start of that programme. And so I hope today that members are able to agree the recommendations to move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. A very helpful summary of a whole piece of work, as you say, has been in nurturing for quite a while. I mean, obviously, I appreciate other further education stuff has been done in the meantime, but this one's taken a bit longer than maybe we would like, but it's important that it's here now. Over to questions. Again, no, absolutely. Sorry, is the lead here? And I'm sorry, Lucy, over to you.
Thank you. Not questions on this time, because I think I have quite a lot of information about this one. I just wanted to say a couple of things before it moves into the general debate. And the first is a big thank you to Andrea and her team for all the work that's gone into this. It has taken longer than we wanted, and part of that is because of the very thorough piece of work that was done by Grant Thornton looking at what was realistic. And I think that Sam and I would probably agree that the outcome of that work wasn't quite what we wanted. But it's really important when you're looking at making these kinds of investments with public money that you don't just do what you want, you do what the data tells you is realistic. And that's what has been the outcome. The other thing I wanted to say is a massive thank you to all the education providers, all the FE providers who have engaged with this process up until this point, and who have put together a really impressive collection of bids for capital funding of various different sizes. We would have loved to be able to give the money to all of them, and obviously there isn't enough money for us to be able to give it to all of them. But that work that they've done really flags up the need and the potential for further investment from this combined authority into capital funding. I think there is probably quite a unanimity across the board that investing in skills for our population is a really important way in which the combined authority can drive productivity in our area. And that therefore, thinking about how we can spend sometimes relatively small bits of money to really upskill people is an important thing for us to do in the future. So I would ask people to support this, the proposals that are in this paper as they stand. But I think that the next steps for the Skills Committee in terms of thinking about what we do for future funding to make sure that our providers are able to do as much for our population as they possibly can is definitely the next thing on our agenda for the Skills Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna.
Just a question for clarification. I totally support this. Obviously, we've been trying to nail this problem in East Cambridgeshire for a very long time, so I'm really pleased to see something happening. I'm just a bit confused about why they've got to sort of apply again. Haven't they already applied, and can't we just give them the money? I just don't get it, sorry.
I'm sure there's a very important reason behind that. Andrea.
So they haven't applied in full yet. So we opened an expression of interest phase where they were literally asked to answer some questions.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Very, very, very pleased to see it and happy to support it, and thank you for all the work.
Any other? Oh, sorry. Al, of course. And Dennis. Yeah.
Thank you. I absolutely support it. Skills absolutely is a really key part of the mix. One thing, and I'm signposting something I know there's already in mind, is that there is a tendency to measure success by level of engagement, which is not a bad measure, but actually the key measure is the right courses for the right fit, the pathways through. So I'm really keen that we focus our measure on successful outcomes and how this investment shifts the overall either breadth of provision, but also the level of qualifications and that our learners achieve. Because one of our areas is to focus on skills, but also on leveling up those skills to move beyond the 2s and the 3s where possible and make sure that's employer-led. So just really mindful, and I know it's something that's been discussed before, to keep that focus on actual completion rates.
Thank you, Al. So just to reassure you that absolutely the kind of outcome measures that we're looking at through the kind of return on investment won't just look at a bum on a seat. It will absolutely look at outcomes in terms of accredited learning, non-accredited learning, job outcomes into specific sectors at specific levels. So we will be able to get a very thorough understanding of how this investment has made a difference.
Dennis. Okay, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mayor. Andrea, obviously the cold spots issue with East Cambs and St Neots, you know, this is something of a legacy programme. I'm heartened by the fact what you're bringing forward is the proposal, because whilst we're not in any shape or form a cold spot but we are a hot spot in terms of demand, we're full to capacity, and we don't just need capital thrown at it. I'm heartened by the fact that you talk about a systemic approach to this, because we've got the Trailblazer money. Delighted to see it come to Peterborough and the region. But what I'd love to see, obviously, is work with you very closely to make sure that, you know, we don't not only address the cold spots, but we have that system change that says where we are full to capacity, we can look at ways to alleviate that and do as Al has said, is, you know, get the right courses for the right people in the right places. Thank you.
Andrea.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. So I'd really welcome future working with you and definite collaboration on that. Thank you.
Sam, Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. And of course, my involvement in discussions, as Andrea and then Lucy, forgive me, Councillor Nessinger mentioned, was as Deputy Chairing the Skills Committee. But of course, I am Huntingdonshire's representative to Skills Committee and in the Hump seat here today. We're one of the cold spot areas. So I just underline that. Only point I wanted to add in this discussion, completely concur with everything that's said, is you know, not wishing to speak for a committee with diverse voices, but I am confident I intuit from the Skills Committee absolutely an openness and enthusiasm for doing exactly what Dennis next to me has advocated. The last thing we want to do, having found expressions of interest from beyond the target cold spot areas, is to say sort of thank you very much, goodbye. We absolutely want to see what we can do to support, systemic involvement of them to take advantage of the opportunities that they present as well. So what's before us proposes moving forward by spending in the areas that have been identified previously for the reasons we well understand, but we absolutely don't want the other opportunities we've picked up to be lost as well. So I'm confident that there's going to be unanimity around that objective.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Just to make this isn't aimed at any one individual, but when I came to read the report, I did have to read it, even though I've been involved in education for a number of years. I did have to reread the report a couple of times to actually get the full sense of it. And I would hope that going forward, we can just have that little bit of clarity. Things may have got lost in translation. So I would hope from here on in, we just need, we sense check things just so that we're clear at every stage, so that if there are legacy issues, we address them now and not leave them to get further down the road. That's a plea rather than insistence, Mayor.
For a moment there, I thought you were going to do sort of about spellings and sort of the grammar wasn't up to. So I thought it was going down a very unusual route, that one. So, Lucy.
Yeah, if I had had anything to do with writing this report, it would have had plenty of spelling mistakes in it. What I did want to say is that I think one of the things about the report is that it's difficult for it to be really clear what's going on here without also having had the briefing that the Skills Committee had on what the various expressions of interest were that came in. And I'm quite certain that if other members around this table would like to have a briefing from Andrea about what the various proposals were, I'm sure that she would be very happy to do that. And they are really interesting. Actually, it's fascinating to see what the proposals that came in from the sector were. And it's quite exciting to see that some of those proposals. I just hope that they come forward and are as exciting as they look at in the kind of very brief outline form that we've seen. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're there. Yep.
Al, would that map into what you were suggesting? If we had a look at them, would that give you a level of comfort based on, is that the sort of thing? Yeah. Okay. Just that, pulling it all together.
Okay. So on this one, we're going to just, I'm going to ask Lucy, I'm assuming you want to propose the recommendations for this, for the further education cold spots are set out in the summary, and you'll need a seconder. I'll take it from Sam. It was there. Right. Councillor Wakeford, those in favour? Unanimous. Okay, lovely. So don't move. Andrea?
Chair, can I just ask, when the money's awarded, could we just have perhaps it will come through the Chief Executive's update process or something. Can we just be notified? That'd be really good.
Okay. Yep. And then as a final, adult skills commissioning strategy, again, if you want to speak to this, Andrea.
So I won't take so much time on this one because it's pretty straightforward. So the commissioning strategy just sets out our intended approach to commission our adult skills funding, of which the combined authority receives in the region of about £13 million annually from the Department for Education on that. The proposal does not differ too drastically to how we've been operating since devolution, which is that we'll continue to grant fund our FE colleges and our local authority skills providers, and that we will procure our independent training providers through an open process. The strategy also starts to just set out some of the kind of key priorities and principles that we want the funding to be used for. And that really starts to highlight the priorities around making sure that it's not just used for skills and sector growth and economic growth, but it also addresses the needs around social mobility and health inequalities and supporting residents through community learning activities so that they can be active citizens in their communities. So there is a real blend that will continue through the funding methodology and how we will spend that across the region. So happy to take any further questions, but hopefully it's straightforward. Thank you.
There is a question, Councillor Bowden.
More of a comment than a question, but I can phrase it as a question if you prefer, Mayor.
Comment or questions, okay by me.
Fine, thank you very much indeed. I read the actual strategy with a little bit of disappointment. I'll support this in the interests of collegiality, of course, as we all do. But I was concerned that any strategy which relates to adult skills should, first of all, properly set the scene as to what the situation is in the combined authority area on skills. And what isn't exemplified within this report, what isn't emphasised, is the fact that we are a combined authority with a greater range of skills in different areas than any other combined authority in the country. We have some areas, such as South Cambridgeshire in particular, and also to a slightly lesser extent Cambridge City, which are right at the top of the table in right across the country in terms of the skills that residents have. And then, I'm sorry to say, we have Fenland, which ranks with Blackpool right at the bottom of the table. The differences between the areas within the combined authority are absolutely stark. And it is a bit surprising that a strategy doesn't, first of all, absolutely recognise that fact, and secondly, recognise that something needs to be done. Now, within the strategy, there are some objectives, there are some metrics which are looked at as aims, and among those metrics are that so far as Fenland and Peterborough are concerned, that those young adults who are not in employment, education and training, that their skills level should be improved in those two areas in particular. And additionally, that as far as individuals who are employed or not in gainful employment, their skills levels also need to be improved. But that's the extent of it. And when we look at the operational principles, and there are 17 of them listed, I was astonished to see that in those operational principles, there is no sense of prioritisation of seeking to ensure that those areas which are at the bottom of the national scale don't get some degree of prioritisation to bring them up. Because the situation, to be quite honest, Mayor, the situation in terms of skills is dire. It's awful. The historical reasons why we are where we are, but it's absolutely dire. And for this strategy to fail even to recognise the vast differences there are across the authority, and therefore the differences of approach and prioritisation that I believe there needs to be, I find extremely disappointing. Having said that, I know that Lucy is very well aware of this fact. I'm hardly telling her anything she doesn't already know, and I know that she's committed to to ensure that there is a significant improvement in the areas which are worst in our area. But this strategy doesn't really reflect that, and I find that very disappointing. I'm not going to oppose it. I don't think it does any good to oppose it, but I really do think that needs to go on the record, and consideration needs to be given about how this is more adequately expressed in the future.
I will let you come back. I was just looking at the paper and just reminding myself, but I know that success measures, which is one of the things that Al, you mentioned, obviously one of them is an increase in the participation of adult learners who are unemployed, economically inactive, and the D is an increase in participation of 19 to 21-year-olds who eat. But that does say particularly in Peterborough and Fenland.
You're correct. I did mention those, Mayor, but yeah. The problem actually arises with the vast majority of individuals who are in employment and are underskilled. So whilst I do appreciate that those are mentioned, specifically for Peterborough and Fenland, that doesn't address the overwhelming majority of individuals where we have the problem. I'm
going to let an expert in the field come in, because I don't know if you go down to that granular level when you do strategy, but I did note that. Okay, over to you, Andrea.
So the objective of the document, it's a commissioning strategy. It's not an adult skills strategy. So the commissioning strategy in itself, the purpose of the document is to set out our intentions around how we will commission providers to deliver skills provision, and that's it. What will accompany this, and what already accompanies this, is a regional skills and employment plan. And that is where we go into the granular detail of what our region looks like, what our key priorities are, what our key objectives are. So we didn't want to swamp this commissioning strategy with that information, because it will exist in a specific document that's well aligned to our local growth plan and will be aligned to the local skills improvement plan that is commissioned later in the year through the LSIP. So I think you've raised some really good points, and had the purpose of that document been that it's the adult skills strategy, I'd absolutely agree with you, and I wouldn't have published it in that form. But its intent is that it is to focus on our commissioning arrangements.
Okay. I'm going to let Al come in.
Thank you. I think Andrea has clarified that. I was going to point out that this is one phase before that, and actually, whilst I absolutely support the fact that we have areas where we need to focus on developing and raising skills, I'll be the first to champion it. When it comes to commissioning at this stage, I don't think we should look at any area differently when it comes to looking at equity of provisioning. Then it comes down to how do we invest and support the initiatives within areas where there's a lower intake rate. We could take an extreme example and say we've got 2 regions where we've got lower skills. Let's put only our focus there. That isn't a growth strategy, because we find our other areas will suffer as a result. So at this stage, whilst I'm totally with it, and I sometimes declare Peterborough as my home camp and through, at this stage, we want the provision to be as wide as possible for providers that would engage and offer it. And then hopefully they'll be challenged to make sure that we're not missing out on those areas that haven't had the same investment before.
Chris,
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor. I totally accept the points which have been made. The point which I'm making here is that the gross disparity which exists at the moment is not reflected in this strategy, and I believe it should be reflected in the commissioning strategy, because the needs of those areas which are most lacking, most deprived in the index of multiple deprivation as far as skills are concerned, the needs are not the same as the needs that there are in the rest of the area. And that's why the commissioning strategy needs to be informed by the needs in the areas which have greatest problem. As far as a comment just made by Al is concerned, which is absolutely correct, it came out in the SPEAR report as well, if your only metric, if your only real objective is to maximize growth in the area, then yes, push all your training into Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire, because you'll get better bang for your buck in terms of the results at the end of the day. But that's not what we stand for. We're not just here to promote growth. We're here to achieve also some degree of equity within the area as a whole, because by bringing places like Fenland and Peterborough up, you actually assist the areas which currently have, in some cases, an overheated economy. So we really do need to concentrate on those areas which have the poorest record in skills, not merely for the 19 to 21-year-olds who aren't in employment, education and training, not merely for the unemployed and those not in gainful employment, but especially for all of those who are in employment anyway, whose skills levels could be improved and they could be more productive than they are now. There's a historical reluctance, I'm sorry to say, and Lucy knows all about this, there's a historical reluctance in Finland for individuals to take advantage of the opportunities which exist for them to increase their skills. And that's why it's hard work to get results from the money which is put in. But it's essential that we do try and do that. And what I'm saying here is that I would have expected that our commissioning strategy would have been influenced by that need. And there's no evidence that that's the case.
I'll let you come back on that, Andrea, because it's a comment from a member, but you're the officer.
Thank you. So I'm pleased to report that we are able to do this through our funding rules and regulations document. Adult skills funding is a very complex thing. And as you can imagine, the rules and regulations, I think we've got a 36-page document that we have to use, which includes everything from residency, eligibility criteria, right the way through to what's funded in terms of provision. And for a long time now, and in the future, we apply disadvantage area uplifts to areas across, but it has to be proportionate to the funding that we have. And you will see that we will soon be procuring skills provision through our independent training providers, and our focus areas are Peterborough and Fenland, and we will include disadvantage uplifts on the funding so that we're supporting providers to put the right provision in place for those learners, and that we are making sure that it is focused, because this is adult skills funding, which is from 19 upwards. So it will be focused on supporting adult learners get into work if they're currently economically inactive, but also to support people who are in work but are low paid so that we can upskill them and help them to have in-work progression. So I hope that reassures you that we are very focused on making sure that our priority areas are dealt with through the mechanisms we have.
Over to you, Lucy.
Mine will be very brief. I think it's been a really useful discussion, and it is important. One of the other things so Andrea's just been talking about the independent skills providers that will be part of this strategy, but actually the majority of our adult skills money goes through Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and actually one of the ways in which we can influence this is within Cambridgeshire County Council, where both Chris and I sit, and through our adult skills programming there, where there has been a focus on, one of the issues that has been historically a problem and continues to be a problem and is highly relevant to the discussion that we spent most of this meeting on, is that in some parts of the county it's quite difficult for people who are economically inactive to access training. So the Cambridgeshire skills team have been working quite hard on going out to provide skills opportunities in kind of closer to where people are, if that's in local libraries, in villages, all sorts of different places. And some of them, I think, from mobile units, all sorts of different ways of doing that. And so one of the things that I would say to Chris is that we need to make sure that we're scrutinising the way that this is spent well through Cambridgeshire County Council. The commissioning document is important as well, but that scrutiny at that level is also crucial. Thank you.
And Anna, you have indicated you want to speak as well.
Yeah, I just, on this issue about commissioning strategy versus wider skills priority strategy, I doubt that any of us would disagree that what we need to do is ensure that our funding is targeted towards the areas of greatest need. I think we'd all agree on that. It's something that is incredibly close to my heart. But I think Andrea has been clear that this particular document is part of a wider package. So this is not about the choices we make in terms of what to prioritise. It's part of that kind of wider bit around the strategy for the commissioning itself, not about the strategy for what we choose to commission. And I think that's probably an important distinction that we need to make. So personally, I feel very reassured by what you're saying, that our priority as a combined authority is on targeting areas of greatest need, but that's not what this particular paper is about.
Oh, Councillor Bowden again.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor. Just to come back on a couple of issues raised. The first is the geographical uplift which exists at the moment in percentage terms. That is not very large at all. And I would expect, and some members may not know what the uplift is. What would you expect it would be? 40%, 50%? Exactly. Well, it's somewhere between 2 and 5%, if I remember correctly. It's not exactly a large uplift. So I would look for that uplift to be re-examined. The second thing is, and again, I fully accept the comments that Anna has just made. We are talking about commissioning processes here, and all I was saying is I thought those commissioning processes should be influenced by the needs that we particularly have. One such need, which I'll mention, and again, it's one I've mentioned before, and I'm mentioning it not so much for this document as for the next one, which will appear, which is associated with it. In terms of adults who are underskilled, or rather their skills are not utilised, certainly in Finland, and I believe it may be elsewhere, those individuals who are from Eastern Europe, many of them have a lot of skills in their native lands which aren't used here, and we fail to show them the opportunities they've got, either to make better use of the skills that they already had before they came here, or to get new skills. And many of those individuals, I believe, would be extremely receptive to the opportunity to get greater skills, unlike some other individuals, I'm sorry to say. And I really would like more emphasis to be placed on focusing on those individuals from Eastern European backgrounds in particular, whom I believe would be much more receptive and much more would give us much better bang for the buck in terms of getting skills increases in the area.
I'll take that as a noted comment. think we've reached the end of comments and questions. So on this again, as chair of the Skills and Employment Committee, I'm taking that you want to move propose the recommendation. And there's a seconder on this one. I'll take you again, Councillor Wakeford. Those in favour? And we finish in unanimity. Thank you all. Thank you all for earlier on and the obviously more substantial item and longer, but safe journeys home, however you got here. And I think the next, I haven't got a date of the next board meeting. 19th of March. Okay. We can make you that a note.